The day Myra Voss found out she was worth something, she was on her knees scrubbing the grout between bathroom tiles with a toothbrush that had seen better days 3 months ago. The funeral was happening downstairs. She could hear the low murmur of it through the floor, the shuffle of expensive shoes on marble, the clink of teacups, the sound of a woman crying in that careful, rehearsed way that people cried when they wanted everyone to notice but no one to approach. Aunt Hilda had died on a Tuesday, which Myra thought was entirely fitting. Tuesday was the most ignored day of the week. Hilda had spent her entire life being the most interesting person in the room, and the last one anyone thought to include in anything. Right up until she stopped breathing, and suddenly, the whole Voss family remembered that they had loved her deeply, and that it was very important for everyone present to know this about them. Myra had not been asked to attend the service. She had not been asked to do anything except, 3 days earlier, be informed by Cousin Petra that the bathrooms on the second floor needed to be spotless before the guests arrived. Guests who were not here to grieve, but to position themselves, to be seen grieving, to begin the quiet campaign of establishing what they deserved from the estate of a woman most of them had regarded as an eccentric inconvenience for the better part of her adult life. So here Myra was, toothbrush, grout, earbuds in, one of those podcasts about deep ocean creatures playing softly because she had always found the ocean calming and had not been calm in a very long time. The host was explaining that at certain depths, pressure became the defining condition of existence. Things that functioned perfectly at the surface were simply not built for that kind of weight. The ocean did not apologize for this. She thought that was fair. The Voss estate sat on the eastern edge of a small city in the north of England, the kind of estate that looked like old money from a distance and felt like old grudges from the inside. 14 rooms, a garden that was beautiful in photographs and treacherous in person, full of hidden edges and unexpected drops. A family that had perfected over generations the precise art of making someone feel completely unnecessary without ever saying a single cruel word directly to their face. The cruelty was structural. It was in what was asked and what was not asked. It was in which stairs you were expected to use and which rooms you understood without being told were not meant for you. Myra had been living here for 2 years. She had arrived with one suitcase and the kind of quiet, practiced desperation that had become so natural to her, she sometimes forgot it was there until something knocked against it, and she felt the bruise. She had never fully unpacked. Not because she intended to leave soon, she had nowhere else to go and no money to get there, which was the precise shape of the problem, but because unpacking meant arranging things on shelves and in drawers as if she had the right to claim that space, and she had not been given that right and had not wanted to take it without the giving. And so the suitcase had lived under the bed with 2/3 of her belongings still inside it for 2 years. She was 24 years old. She had a degree in library science that she had paid for with loans still being repaid at a rate that would have been genuinely funny if they had been someone else's loans. She had no savings. One functioning pair of boots and one pair with a separated sole she had glued twice with the wrong adhesive, and which she knew would not survive a third repair. A knowledge of this house that was comprehensive and involuntary, every floorboard that announced wait, every radiator that knocked in cold weather, every window that stuck when it rained, the particular needs and patterns and moods of every member of the household, and exactly how much care it took to navigate each of them on any given day. She was useful. She had made herself useful for 2 years because usefulness was the only currency she had, and because the alternative was to be somewhere considerably worse, and she had chosen useful over worse, and had continued choosing it every morning. She was not called Myra in this house, she was called the girl, as in, has the girl finished the East Corridor yet, or can someone tell the girl we need more towels, or the girl made something with pasta for dinner, I couldn't eat it. She had been answering to the girl for long enough now that her head turned when she heard it, the same turn, the same readiness. Her body had accepted the replacement, her mind had not entirely followed. She had stopped trying to correct it after the 3rd month. Corrections required energy and a sense of entitlement to your own name that she had spent somewhere she could not remember and had not been able to find again. The podcast was talking about the anglerfish now. The female was the impressive one, large, capable with the light. The male was small and relatively simple, and his whole existence from the moment of maturity was organized around finding a female. When he found one, he bit into her skin and began to merge with her biologically, losing his organs and his independence one by one until he was, for all practical purposes, an attachment, kept alive by her blood supply. Existing for one function. Myra looked at the toothbrush in her hand. She looked at the grout. She put the earbud back in. The floorboard in the hallway outside gave its specific creak, the one she had learned to read without hearing it directly, the way you learned the sounds of a house when you lived in it long enough to speak the language. This one meant someone was in the back hallway rather than the main corridor. Heavy step, someone who didn't know the floors or didn't care about them. The footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. The door opened. A young man she had never seen before was standing in the opening. He was somewhere near her own age, very carefully dressed in the manner of someone who worked for a firm that maintained specific opinions about how its people looked. He had a badge clipped to his lapel that read Hollies and Crane, Solicitors, and he was holding a manila envelope in both hands with the deliberate grip of someone who had been told the contents were significant. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Miss Voss," he said. Myra sat back on her heels. The floor was cold through her jeans. "Which one?" He checked the flap of the envelope, consulting something inside. Myra Voss. She had not heard her own name said aloud in approximately 11 days. She had counted without meaning to because this was the kind of thing she counted. "Yes. My name is Ben. I'm with Hollies and Crane." He was earnest in the way of someone who had recently finished school and still believed that doing things correctly was its own reward. "We handled your Aunt Hilda's legal affairs. I've been asked to inform you in person before the formal reading tomorrow morning that—" He paused. He looked at the toothbrush. He looked back at her face. "You are listed in your aunt's will as a primary beneficiary." Myra looked at the toothbrush. She looked at Ben. She looked at the grout she had spent 45 minutes on, which was genuinely clean now, which was the only thing that had been asked of her that she could verify with certainty. "Say that again," she said. "You are listed in the will," he said again, clearly and carefully, the way people repeated important things to people they wanted to be sure had heard them. "As the primary beneficiary. The full reading is tomorrow morning at 10. We were instructed to notify you in person this evening." A brief pause. "We tried your mobile several times." "Battery's dead," she said. "Has been for 4 days." She did not say it was dead because she could not afford a new charger and had been too proud to ask to borrow one because some information was not anyone else's business. "Primary beneficiary, that means." "The estate," he said gently. "She left it to you, with conditions which will be outlined fully tomorrow, but I was specifically asked to tell you that you should be in the front row." She looked at him. "The first chair," he said, "on the left." She nodded slowly. He nodded. "Do you have any questions?" She had approximately 400 questions, each of them more complicated than the last. "No," she said. "Thank you, Ben." He left the way he had arrived, efficiently, purposefully, with the careful tread of someone completing a task on a list. She heard the main staircase rather than the back one. She registered this, the main stairs. He had access to the good stairs. Myra sat on the bathroom floor for a while longer. Downstairs, someone had found the memorial playlist Hilda had apparently prepared for her own service, which was so exactly the kind of thing Hilda would do that it was almost a comfort, that small evidence of her organizing herself even here, even past the end. Soft piano, one of those pieces she had described once in the kitchen as architecture for the ears. Myra thought about the kitchen. She thought about Tuesday mornings, which had been the thing she held onto in this house, the way you held onto a handhold on a surface that had very few of them. Tuesdays the cousins were usually out, Petra at her organized fitness class, Owen at whatever meetings he referred to by their importance rather than their content, Diane at the social events she attended with the fierce dedication of someone treating community involvement as a form of self-defense. Tuesday mornings the house breathed differently. And Hilda, who had never needed a reason to appear somewhere she wanted to be, would find Myra wherever she was and would simply sit. Not assigning tasks, not supervising, just sitting. She talked about books she had finished and books she intended to read, and once an argument she had with a librarian in 1979 about the proper organizational method for a small collection of maps, which Myra had found so unexpectedly interesting that she had asked 3 follow-up questions, and the conversation had run past noon. She talked about the Oslo trip with such specific detail that Myra had eventually bought a cheap paperback on Norwegian architecture, just so she could participate properly. She talked about a dog named Gordon who had apparently been the defining relationship of a significant stretch of her adult life, whose name came up with the frequency and specificity of someone who still thought about him on a daily basis. She used Myra's name. Every single time. Myra, have you read anything by? And Myra, what do you think about? And Myra, if you could go anywhere on a Tuesday that was not here, where would you go? And Myra would answer, and Hilda would listen with the kind of attention that was interested rather than polite, and the conversation would go where it went. And when Hilda left, she would say, "Good morning, Myra," in the same tone she would have used to say it to a person who mattered. She had not understood at the time what this was. She understood it now, from the bathroom floor, with 40 people downstairs who had spent 2 years failing to learn her name. She stood, she washed her hands. She went to her room, the smallest on the second floor, the one with the radiator that clicked all night and the window that stuck in wet weather, and which she opened with a specific upward pressure at the left edge, and she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the wall. Something had been placed under her door while she was in the bathroom. She had not noticed when, which meant it had arrived in the last 20 minutes, which meant someone had come up the stairs quietly while she was sitting on the floor. She picked it up. Thick cream paper, the kind of paper that had been specifically purchased for correspondence, a letterhead at the top, a small crest she did not recognize, and a name in clean black letters, Vale. She had never seen this name. She had sorted Hilda's correspondence, had organized it and passed it on and filed it. She had handled every piece of post that came through this house for 2 years, and she had never seen this letterhead, which meant it had arrived through a channel she did not have access to, which meant Hilda had kept it private. The handwriting was precise, the kind of handwriting produced by someone who had learned to write before it became optional and had continued practicing because they found it worth practicing. 4 lines. "Miss Voss, I knew your aunt for 40 years. She spoke of you often and with a great deal of affection. I will be present at the reading tomorrow morning. Please do not leave before I have had the opportunity to speak with you. E. Vale." She read it twice. Turned it over, nothing on the back. Read it a 3rd time. 40 years. E. Vale. She was good at keeping information organized, and she had no record of this person anywhere in what she knew of Hilda's life, which was either an accident or a deliberate gap, and Hilda had not been a person who produced accidental gaps. She folded the note. She put it in the pocket of the clean blouse she had been saving for a future occasion without knowing what the occasion would be, which was hanging on the back of the door because she had already decided she would wear it tomorrow. The note sat in the pocket against the clean cotton. She lay down. The radiator clicked. She thought about the word conditions. She rotated it carefully, because words with conditions attached were words you needed to examine from every side before you accepted the weight of them. She thought about what kind of conditions a woman like Hilda would attach to a decision like this. She thought about E. Vale and 40 years of correspondence she had never been allowed to see. She thought about the anglerfish. She fell asleep without deciding to and dreamed about the ocean floor, where the pressure was constant and complete, and nothing worked the way it did at the surface. She was awake before anyone else in the morning. This had always been true. She had been an early riser since she was a child, or she had become one through years of practice, and the early morning hours of this house had been, for 2 years, the only time that was unambiguously hers. No one asked her to do things before 6. No one needed her before 7. The hours between 5 and 7 were where she read and thought, and was a person with an interior rather than a function with a name she was not called by. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen counter and drank it looking at the garden. The roses along the east wall were heavy with last night's rain. She had spent a lot of time looking at those roses. They were maintained by a gardener named Douglas who came on Thursdays, who was paid a wage and given his hours, and treated with the professional regard that people who were formally employed expected and received as a matter of course. She had long since stopped comparing her situation to his because the comparison was not useful and not flattering to anyone involved. She was still standing at the counter when Petra came in. Petra was tall and carried herself with the authority of someone who had been told from childhood that the space she occupied was rightfully hers. She entered the kitchen already in the middle of a thought, already speaking before she had fully arrived, which was her default mode. "The drawing room needs to be rearranged before 10, she said. "The solicitor wants rows, but that room doesn't work in rows. Can you?" She stopped. She had looked up. She was looking at Myra's blouse, the good one, pressed and hanging properly, already on Myra's body at 6 in the morning, and at Myra's face, which was doing nothing useful for Petra's rapidly adjusting assumptions. "Are you planning to attend the reading?" "Yes," Myra said. A pause. The quality of Petra's silences had a particular texture to them, the texture of someone sorting options. "The reading is a private family matter." "I know. We've all been through an emotional few days, and—" "Ben came to see me last night," Myra said. "From Hollies and Crane. He told me I'm named in the will." The silence this time was different, longer. And underneath it something that was not quite shock. Petra was not someone who allowed herself to be shocked, but the rapid, controlled recalibration of someone who had just discovered a piece of the board she thought she understood was not where she had put it. "That," Petra said carefully, "is not possible. He had the paperwork and a badge." Another pause. Hilda was not herself in the final months, she was. She planned her own memorial playlist, Myra said. She was deeply herself right up until the end. Petra left the kitchen without finishing her sentence. She did not take the cup she had been carrying. Myra rinsed her coffee cup and set it on the rack, which she had always done, which no one had ever commented on. She went upstairs to get ready. At 9:45 she came down the main staircase. This was something she had not done in 2 years. The main staircase with its dark banister and the ancestral portraits looking down with the expression of people who expected to be obeyed was not a staircase she had used. She had used the back stairs, which were narrower and had no portraits and were understood without anyone spelling it out to be the appropriate route for her. She used the main stairs. She walked into the drawing room and found the chair in the front row that had a folded card with her name on it. The correct spelling, her full name, printed on cream card by someone who worked for a firm that cared about details, and she sat down in it. The room was filling. She felt the quality of the room change when she sat in the front row, the way a room's collective attention shifted when something unexpected happened in it. She looked at the front of the room and not to her right or her left. At 9:59, a hand appeared in her peripheral vision as someone settled into the empty chair to her left. She turned. The man in the chair was not like anyone else in the room. She registered this as a fact before she had analyzed why it was true, the way you registered certain facts before you could articulate them. He was still, not the stillness of someone sitting politely or someone suppressing energy or someone performing calm. The stillness of something that had stopped needing to perform anything a very long time ago and simply was what it was. He wore dark clothing without ornamentation. His hands rested on his knees. His face carried the particular quality of someone who had been looking at the world for long enough to have stopped being surprised by what it produced. He looked at her the moment she looked at him. His eyes were dark and steady with the depth of something that had not been recently disturbed. "Miss Voss," he said, quiet just for her. She thought about the note in her pocket, the precise handwriting, E. Vale. He nodded. "You knew her." "I knew her," he said, "for 40 years. She was one of the finest people I have ever been privileged to know, and I say that having known a very great many people over a very long time." The clock on the mantelpiece struck 10. The solicitor began. Myra listened to the formal language with the focused attention she had trained herself to give to documents, pulling meaning from structure, following the argument beneath the vocabulary. She tracked the distribution of objects, the dispersal of accounts and collections, the particular care with which Hilda had thought about each person and each thing and what should go where. Each bequest made sense when you understood the person making it. She had always been organized in this way, even here. Even past the end. She was aware the entire time of Edric Vale beside her, not obtrusively, not as a distraction, simply as a presence the way a wall is a presence. You know it is there, and you know it is not moving, and you orient yourself around it without particularly deciding to. The solicitor reached the main estate. He read the description, he read the valuation, he read the beneficiary. Myra Voss. The room erupted behind her. She heard Petra's controlled sound that was not quite a word. She heard chairs, whispers with edges. "With one condition," the solicitor continued, and the room recalibrated again. Marriage, the word landed in stages, the way a very large word sometimes did, first the syllables, then the meaning, then the full weight of it arriving after a slight delay, the way thunder arrived after lightning. And then the name attached to it, Lord Edric Vale, and the room erupting completely this time with no pretense of control, and Myra not moving. She turned and looked at the man beside her. He was looking at the solicitor with the level, undisturbed expression he had worn since he sat down. Then he turned and looked at her, and around them the noise of 40 people discovering their assumptions were wrong rose and crashed and kept crashing, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "You already knew," she said. "Yes, before today." "Yes, did you agree to it?" He looked at her steadily. "I agreed not to refuse," he said, "which is different." Myra looked at the front of the room. She thought about 40 years of letters she had never been allowed to see. She thought about the note under her door. She thought about the specific weight of a woman who had planned her own memorial music and written a careful letter to a man she trusted and arranged, from the other side of the end of her life, a door for people she loved. "All right," she said quietly, "only for him. Then we need to talk." The small sitting room at the end of the hallway had been unused for the 2 years Myra had lived in the house. She had cleaned it on a rotating schedule, dusted, vacuumed, straightened, and had found it each time a room that seemed to be waiting for a purpose it had not yet been given, cold in the particular way of rooms that held old air, smelling of the books no one touched and the rug that absorbed the absence of use. She sat in the working chair, he sat in the chair across from her. Outside, she could hear the sound of the drawing room redistributing its shock into conversation and motion, the way a disturbed body of water redistributed itself after something had been dropped into it. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I should tell you what I am," he said, "before anything else. Everything after that will be simpler once you have that information." "All right," she said. He told her. He told it the way she would later come to understand. He told everything important, without drama, without the performance that significant things sometimes generated around themselves. He laid the facts down in order. He was several centuries old. He was, in the language that had settled around his kind over the years, a vampire, though he noted the word carried implications he found imprecise, and which he would be happy to clarify if she had specific questions. He held a title that carried legal weight in 3 Northern European countries, though he had lived quietly for several decades and did not exercise the weight publicly. He had a house in northern England. He had staff who had worked for him for years and who knew what he was. He had met Hilda Voss at a book auction in Edinburgh in 1984. She had been arguing over a first edition of a natural history text with the focused determination of someone who had already decided it was going to be hers. He had been on the same side of the argument. There had been a direct disagreement. She had won it, partly through the force of her position and partly, he suspected, because she had made him laugh at exactly the wrong moment for his concentration. She had then offered to buy him coffee as if winning a disagreement against a stranger was a perfectly ordinary foundation for a social engagement. He had gone, because in 40 years of living carefully and quietly, he had not met many people who argued with him without knowing what he was, and who were more interesting for not knowing. She had been one of the most interesting people he had encountered in a very long time. They had been friends since. Real friends of the kind that existed outside convenience and outside the social machinery that most friendships were secretly built upon. She was, he said, one of the only people he had trusted completely. He said this without sentimentality, just as a statement of what was true. Myra sat with this for a moment. "She wrote to you about me," she said. "Yes, in each letter over several years, with increasing detail." "What did she say?" He considered this carefully. "She was concerned about what was happening in this house," he said, "specifically about what was being asked of you and what was not being given to you in return. She found it," he chose the word deliberately, "unacceptable, but she did not believe a direct intervention on her part would produce a lasting change. She believed the family would undo anything she did while she was here once she was no longer here to maintain it. So she arranged the structure to change," Myra said. "Yes," he said, "she thought structurally. It was one of her more reliable qualities." Myra looked at the window. The roses were still dripping. The gray morning persisted beyond the glass. "She could have simply left me money," she said, "without conditions." "She could have," he said. "She didn't believe you would keep it. She believed the family would find a way to claim some of it, or that you would let them, because you had not yet learned how to hold things that were yours without apologizing for having them. He said this not unkindly, as a fact he was stating. She wanted the structure to be one they could not undo. Myra felt the truth of this arrive flat and certain in her chest. She did not show it. "And you," she said, "what do you get from this arrangement?" He was quiet for a moment that was thinking, not evasion. "She believed," he said slowly, "that I had spent a very long time keeping myself at a careful distance from the world, that I had become," he paused, "narrow, in the way that any living thing becomes narrow when it stops reaching toward anything. She believed I needed to be reminded that the world still contained people worth being present for." He looked at his hands. "She was right," he said. "She was very frequently right. It was one of the more difficult things about her." Myra almost smiled. She let the almost happen without stopping it, then looked at the window. "I want to understand the practical terms before I tell you what I'm going to do," she said. "Not the emotional terms, the practical ones, all of them, specifically." "Of course." He opened the folder he had carried out of the drawing room. He laid the documents on the table between them. He talked through them with the same factual clarity he had brought to telling her what he was: organized, complete, without the editorial layer people sometimes added when they wanted to steer you toward a particular conclusion. The legal marriage had to be properly registered. There was a cohabitation requirement of 30 days, as specified in the will. After 30 days, the residence arrangement was flexible. They could live in the same house or in separate residences as suited them. The estate transferred to Myra upon fulfillment of the condition, not after a waiting period. There was a provision for legal dissolution after 2 years if both parties consented, but the estate transfer was not reversible even in the case of dissolution. She read the documents herself after he finished explaining them. She was a careful reader. She had trained herself to be one over years of handling information professionally and personally. She read every line, including the ones that were technically optional to read. She found 2 places where the language was imprecise enough to support more than one interpretation. She asked about both of them. He answered both directly and without hedging. She set the papers on the table. "You have a house," she said. "Yes, about 3 hours north." "Yes, what is it like?" He considered. "Old, well-maintained, large but manageable. The library is significant." She looked up. "The library?" "Yes, She said nothing for a moment. "Staff who know what you are." "Yes, they have worked for me for a long time, and they understand the situation." "And the marriage, would they know about this, about me?" "They would know you were my wife," he said. "The circumstances of the arrangement are yours to decide whether to share." She looked at the documents again. She thought about each sentence she had just read, and what it actually meant in lived terms, in daily terms, in the terms of what your life looked like when you were inside it rather than looking at it from a legal document. "I need 24 hours, she said. "Of course, Not because I don't understand what you've said. I understand it clearly. I need the 24 hours because I want to make this decision from myself, not from the situation pressing on me." She met his eyes directly. "I have been in situations that pressed me into decisions for 2 years, and I have a very clear sense of what that feels like, and I am not interested in doing it again." He held her gaze, did not look away, did not look uncomfortable with what she had said. "That is entirely reasonable," he said. "I have one more thing to say," she said. "Yes, I'm not interested in being managed, handled. I have been managed for 2 years. I have been handled with a great deal of efficiency, and I know what it looks like and what it feels like, and I am telling you clearly now, at the beginning of whatever this is, that I don't want that." He was quiet. Then, "Hilda told me much the same thing about you." She used the word handled specifically. "She was right," Myra said. "She usually was." "Yes," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that was not simply agreement. He stood. He produced a card from inside his jacket and set it on the table beside the folder. The letterhead, a phone number. "Call me when you're ready," he said. He left. She heard him move through the hallway, the main hallway, and heard the distant, managed noise of the Voss family still processing the morning, and then the sound of the front door. She sat in the small sitting room alone. She thought about 40 years of letters, about the word conditions, about a man who had admitted clearly that he had become narrow and who had said it without shame and without the deflection that most people used when they named something uncomfortable about themselves. She thought about Hilda saying you deserve more than you ask for. She thought about how she had answered, "You are very kind," and how Hilda had looked at her with a look she had not understood at the time and which she was beginning to understand now. She picked up the card. She put it in her pocket with the note. She went upstairs. She had 24 hours. She was going to use all of them honestly. She called him at 7 the following morning from the kitchen, before anyone else was awake. "I have a condition," she said when he answered, just that directly. "Tell me," he said. "I want 3 days at your house before I sign anything, not as an inspection, not as an audit. I want to see what it actually is and feel what it actually is before I commit to being in it." She paused. "I've spent 2 years making decisions based on what I had rather than what I chose. I want this to be a choice." "That is a completely reasonable request," he said. "I have a second one. I'm listening. What I said yesterday about being managed. I'm saying it again formally, so that it is the first established term between us before any other terms are established. I can tell the difference between being cared for and being steered. I have been steered for a long time by people who believed they were doing me a service, and I am telling you at the outset that I am not interested in that dynamic." A brief pause on the line. "Understood," he said, without defensiveness, without explanation, just received. "Friday," she said, "if that works for you." "Friday is fine." A quiet moment. She used to say, Myra said, that she had a very old friend who reminded her that time was not a thing to waste. I thought she meant someone who was reaching the end of something. Someone who had begun to feel the limit of their days. He said nothing. "She meant something quite different, didn't she?" Myra said. "Yes," he said. "Right," she said, "Friday." She ended the call. She stood at the counter with the kitchen around her in the early morning quiet, and the garden outside, and the roses that someone else tended, and the house that had never been hers. She thought about Friday. She thought about what it meant to be going somewhere rather than simply remaining somewhere. It felt, she thought, like the specific quality of a door opening. Not all the way, not yet, just open. The car came at 10 on Friday morning. She was ready at 9:45, which was her version of on time. The driver was a man named Gary who communicated his willingness to make the journey without conversation, which she found immediately comfortable. She sat in the back with her suitcase in the boot, and the book she was in the middle of open in her lap, and watched the country change through the window. She had repacked 3 times. This was not indecision, it was precision. The first pack had been for the version of this she feared it might be, mostly formal, mostly managed, mostly performing competence and composure for someone else's benefit. She had unpacked all of it and started again. The second pack had overcorrected so thoroughly toward practical comfort that she appeared to be preparing for an outdoor expedition of some length. The third pack was what she actually needed for 3 days. Real clothes, the working boots, the library book, the notebook, the small ceramic mug she had bought herself in the 3rd month at the Voss house from a charity shop with £3 she had set aside specifically for something that would be only hers. The mug, the book, the notebook, everything else was negotiable. The house emerged from the distance in stages, which was the right way for a house to emerge, letting you adjust to it incrementally rather than producing the whole of it at once. The gate first, iron, old, standing open, not as performance but as practice. Then the drive, curving through trees that were not ornamental but functional, the trees of people who thought about what grew well in a place rather than what impressed visitors to it. Then the gardens, working beds, deliberate planting, a corner that appeared to have been given over to its own judgment about what it wanted to do. Then the house, stone the color of all the weather it had absorbed, which was many colors in different lights, solid without insisting on it, not trying to be impressive, simply being what it was in the way that things were when they had been what they were for long enough that there was no alternative version. The tension she had been carrying in her shoulders for 2 years dropped. She noticed its absence the way you noticed a sound stopping. Clara Finch was at the door before Gary had finished with the boot. Compact, direct, mid-40s, the kind of person who had formed a working opinion about most things and organized her life around those opinions without unnecessary revision. She shook Myra's hand correctly, not too long, not too brief, not too firm and not apologetic. "Mrs. Finch," she said, "I manage the house. Anything you need that Mr. Vale isn't available for, I'm the person to ask." Thank you, Myra said. Room first, then the house if you'd like to see it. Yes, please. The entrance hall was stone-floored, high-ceilinged, and should have been cold and formal, and was instead legible, readable in the way that spaces were when they had been arranged by someone who actually lived in them. A coat on the hook that was a used coat worn regularly, boots below it with dried mud on the treads, an opened letter on the hall table, a book that had been set down face open on its spine. These were the details of inhabitation rather than decoration, and she read them the way she read documents, with the attention that found meaning in arrangement. The east wing was up a half-stair and along a corridor. Her room was at the corner. When Clara opened the door, Myra stopped inside it. The window seat. A wide sill with a cushion, in the corner of the room where two windows met. Simple, old, the kind of architectural feature that houses included when they were built by people who thought about how people would live in them rather than how they would look from outside. She had had a window seat once in the last house that had been genuinely hers when she was 8 years old. She had not consciously missed it, but she recognized, standing in the doorway, that some part of her had been missing it consistently and quietly for a very long time. Bathroom is through there, Clara said. The next room isn't in use, so you have the corner to yourself. Dinner at 7, I'll leave you to settle. Myra set her bag down. She did not open it. She registered this without comment, that she had placed it down without immediately opening it to establish her right to the space, which was something she had always done on arrival somewhere, always establishing quickly the minimal footprint of her presence. She had put it down and left it. She went to the window and sat in the seat. She looked at the hills, the garden below, the sky above the hills, the particular pale blue of an English morning making its best effort. She sat there for 12 minutes. She was not doing anything. She was simply sitting in a window seat in a room that someone had said was hers, looking at hills, and the 12 minutes were the most completely itself she had felt in a very long time. She found the library without being shown to it. Libraries announced themselves. She had been able to find them since she was a child, by the way the other rooms of a house oriented toward them, by the quality of the shelves in hallways, by the way books on side tables were handled objects rather than decorative ones. She followed the evidence through the ground floor and found the library at the back, a room that had been built around its purpose in the way that only the best rooms were built. Shelves from floor to ceiling with rolling ladders, books that had been chosen and read and kept, the smell of paper and years of use. She was on the second rung of a ladder, working her way along a row of 19th-century natural history books, when she heard someone enter. She turned. Edric Vale was at the foot of the shelves looking up at her. Dark grey sweater, dark trousers, no coat. The drawing room version had been the formal version, the version for outside. This was the version that lived inside this house, and it was simply present in the way that the house itself was present, directly, without performance. You found it, he said. Was I meant to wait? No, Clara was told to let you have the full access. She looked at the shelf beside her. They're organized by publication date. Yes, not by subject. I find the argument more interesting that way. You follow a line of thinking across time rather than reading all the arguments about one subject simultaneously. The disagreements become more visible. She considered this on its merits. That's a defensible cataloging principle. Thank you. She came down the ladder. He had moved to the center of the room, hands easy in his pockets. There was a quality about him in this space that was different from the drawing room, a settled ease, the ease of something in the place where it belonged. How long have you had this collection? She asked. This room was built in 1831. The books started before that. Some of the older ones came from a previous library. Where was the previous library? Prussia, though the borders there have been moved several times since. She looked at the far wall with new attention. Books from a country that no longer existed in the same form. Books that had been moved and preserved and were here now, in a room built for them in northern England, organized by publication date. I want to ask you something directly, she said. Go ahead. Did Hilda instruct you to be kind to me? To manage the first impression? He looked at her and did not take the question as an accusation. He gave it the consideration it deserved. She told me to be honest with you, he said. She was explicit that she considered honesty more useful than kindness. She said, and I am quoting her precisely, that kindness without honesty was a decoration with no structural value. Myra nodded once. She also told me not to pity you, he said, which I do not. She thought about the worth of this, considerable. All right, she said, I'm going to keep looking at the books. The library is yours, he said. He went to the desk in the corner, and she heard him working, and she turned back to the shelves and began to move through them with the specific pleasure of a system making itself legible. She was good at this. She had forgotten how good at this she was. The pleasure of it had been dormant in her for 2 years, and it woke now quietly, like something that had been waiting for the right conditions. 2 hours passed without either of them requiring them to be anything. At 7 she went to dinner and found the table set with the care of someone who had thought about what was needed rather than what looked appropriate. She ate without measuring the amount against some internal threshold of what she was allowed. Clara's cooking was good, direct, with the root vegetables from the working beds she had noticed from the window. She ate all of it. He asked her 2 questions: what had she studied and whether she had found it useful, and what was the egg method. She told him about the egg. 6 minutes, not less, not more, an underline under the 6. His expression shifted in the small, contained way she was beginning to identify as the expression he produced when something landed precisely where he had not expected it. She gave me the same instruction in 1993, he said, with the underline. They were quiet. She had not talked about Hilda to anyone since the morning she died. She had been carrying the grief of it in the specific way she carried most things, compactly, internally, set to the side so it would not inconvenience anyone. Now in this kitchen she felt it shift. She was the only person in that house, she said, who used my name. He did not fill the space around this with comfort or reassurance. He picked up his tea and held it, and the silence held what she had said without trying to manage it, and she sat in the holding of it and felt it hold. Outside the hills were holding the last of the evening light, and the house was warm around them, and she was somewhere she had been brought to by a dead woman's precision and a living man's willingness not to refuse, and it was not what she had expected, and it was, she thought, exactly right. She slept without waking for the first time in longer than she could count. In the morning the hills were gold with early sun, and she sat in the window seat for 20 minutes with her coffee going cold and felt, without qualification, that she was somewhere she was allowed to be. By the 11th morning at Vale House, Myra had a routine. She had not designed it. Routines were what happened when a place was consistent enough to organize yourself around, when the environment did not keep shifting under you, demanding constant recalibration. She woke before the light. She made tea in the kitchen, loose leaf, 2 minutes precisely, and took it to the library. She read for an hour. She had started at the 1860s and was working forward through the shelves in order, which meant she was also working forward through the argument the collection made about the natural world, watching how understanding shifted across decades, watching old certainties get quietly replaced by new ones. She had a working relationship with Clara that was built on mutual recognition of competence. Clara managed the house. Myra was learning the house. There was no friction between these two things, and Clara had seemed, from the beginning, neither threatened nor particularly charmed by Myra's presence, which Myra found exactly right. They talked about practical things, and occasionally about non-practical things. Once, briefly, about the architectural changes to the East Wing in the 1920s that had resulted in the particular angle of light in the corner room. And it was the talk of 2 organized people sharing a space, which was comfortable in a specific and underrated way. She had made a project of the library. On day 4 she had found the first gap in the collection, a period of about 8 years in the 1870s, where the natural history section was thin in a way that felt deliberate rather than accidental. On day 6, she found 2 more gaps in different sections. By day 9 she had a rough picture of what was missing and where, and she mentioned this at dinner with the neutral precision of someone noting a fact about a system they have been studying. He had said, without pause, that she was right about all 3 gaps, and that the catalogue was in the bottom drawer of the desk, and that if she wanted to update it she was welcome to. She had opened the catalogue. It was thorough and organized at a level of professional quality that surprised her, and she had asked when it had last been updated. 1994, he said. That's 30 years of gaps, she said. Yes. Can I update it? The catalog is yours, he said. She had been working on it since. The project gave structure to her days without requiring anyone to assign it to her, and the structure gave her something that her 2 years at the Voss house had not given her, the experience of doing work that was visibly hers, that accumulated into something, that changed the thing she was working on in a way she could measure and track and feel the progress of. On the 11th morning, she was in the library with the catalog open when Clara appeared in the doorway. 3 vehicles on the drive, Clara said. Petra Voss, her brother, their mother, a man with a legal briefcase. Myra set down her pen. She thought for the seconds she needed. Where is Mr. Vale? The study, he's been told. She stood, she straightened the notebook to parallel with the catalog. She walked to the top of the main stairs. The group that had entered the entrance hall without waiting at the door had the organized quality of people who had planned this arrival. Petra at the front with her considered clothing and prepared expression. Owen slightly behind with his professional posture. Diane Voss with the compressed bearing of someone who had decided this situation was beneath her dignity, but had come anyway because the alternative was to concede ground. The solicitor with his briefcase, taking in the house with the assessment of someone calculating value. Myra came downstairs. She came at her own pace, not performing, not hurrying, at the pace that was her pace. Petra turned when she heard the stairs. She rearranged her expression into the version she used when she wanted to appear reasonable, while being something other than reasonable. Myra, she said, the name, for the first time in 2 years, from Petra's mouth. It sat in the air between them with the quality of something tactical. Petra, Myra said. We thought a direct conversation would be more productive than correspondence, Petra said. You could have called. This kind of conversation benefits from being in person. You arrived without warning, Myra said. To a house you weren't invited to, that's not directness, that's a different thing. Petra's expression adjusted, a small, practiced recalibration. We have concerns, she said, about the conditions under which the will was produced. Hilda was not herself in her final months, Myra. The decisions she made deserved to be looked at carefully. The attachment she developed was. She planned her own memorial music, Myra said. She had been managing her own legal affairs with Hollies and Crane for 30 years. She wrote a letter to friends she had maintained for 40 years and described in specific detail what she was arranging and why. She said this without heat because heat would have suggested she needed to argue for it. She did not. If the concern is her clarity of mind, the documentation suggests it was complete. Our concern, Owen said from behind Petra, is whether the relationship between you and our aunt accurately reflects. She sat with me in the kitchen, Myra said, on Tuesday mornings. For 2 years, she talked about books and a dog she had in the 1980s and the right way to cook a soft-boiled egg. She used my name every time. In a house where I was called the girl by everyone else, she called me Myra every single time. She looked at all of them. That is the relationship. I'm available to answer questions about it in whatever forum is appropriate. Diane Voss made a sound she did not develop into a sentence. We've engaged a solicitor to examine the will's validity, and the circumstances of Owen began. The will was drafted by Hollies and Crane, Edric said, from the corridor behind them. He had come from the study. He was wearing his coat, which meant he had seen the cars from the window, and had taken exactly the time he needed to decide to come and not a second more. He stood at the edge of the entrance hall and addressed Owen's solicitor directly with the calm attention of someone speaking to a professional peer. It has been independently verified twice. If you have grounds for a legal challenge, you are welcome to bring it through the court. We'll address it there. He looked at Petra. I believe you've said what you came to say. He opened the front door. It was so direct and so final and so utterly without drama that the Voss family departed within 4 minutes. Petra laughed, and Petra looked at Myra from the door with an expression that was trying to be several things and succeeding at none of them. Myra looked back. The cars went down the drive, the gates closed. Myra stood in the entrance hall. Her heart was faster than usual, which she noted without judgment as a physiological response to something that had mattered. She had said things she had been not saying for 2 years. She had said them calmly and in order, and she did not regret any of them. Are you all right? Edric asked. Almost, she said. She looked at the door. I've been saying those things in my head since the first month. I didn't know today was the day they were going to come out. They were accurate, he said. I know, a pause. Thank you for the door. You were handling it, he said. Yes, she said, but I've always been the one who found the exit in difficult conversations. I've removed myself before things could reach a conclusion. She looked at the door. It was different to have someone else open it. He was quiet. She did not ask for more. She had learned in 11 days that his silences were not failures to respond but actual responses, and that what she had just said had been received and was being held. Library, he said after a moment. Yes, she said. They went. She updated 2 more catalog entries before the morning was done. On the 14th night, Myra carried the letter to the kitchen. She had been carrying it since she arrived. It had been in the inside pocket of the bag since the last morning at the Voss house, where she had taken it from the drawer in her room and folded it with the specific care of someone handling something they were not yet ready to open, and put it somewhere safe for later. Later had arrived. She knew it was later the way she knew most things about herself, not from deliberation, but from a clear recognition when the moment presented itself. She made tea the right way, loose leaf 2 minutes. She sat at the kitchen table and put the letter in front of her. The seal was blue wax, the pale, particular blue of Hilda's personal correspondence, the letters she had managed and sorted and delivered for 2 years without knowing that this category existed. She understood now that the blue wax letters were a separate correspondence entirely, going somewhere she had no access to, held with a privacy that had been deliberate and complete. She broke the seal. 3 pages. The handwriting was smaller than Hilda's usual, the hand of someone whose strength was going, whose control of a pen was diminishing but whose intention for every word was unchanged, still deliberate, still precise, still Hilda. She read it. She read it twice. The first page was about seeing her, not watching her seeing her, the difference between the two. Hilda wrote about the Tuesday mornings with the detail of someone who had paid careful attention and wanted the object of that attention to know they had been seen. She wrote about the things she had noticed that no one else had appeared to notice, the way Myra moved through the house with the careful economy of someone who understood her presence was conditional, the way she ate measured amounts, the way she answered questions with exactly what was asked and nothing more, as if more would be taking something she had not been offered. She had seen all of this, Hilda wrote, and she had found it unacceptable, and she had thought for a very long time about what she could do about it that would actually hold. The second page was about what she had arranged and why, but also about E. Vale and about the 40 years, and about the specific quality of his loneliness which she described with the affection of someone who had watched it for a long time, and had loved the person inside it without being able to fix it. She wrote that she believed Myra and Edric were, in complementary ways, people who had spent too long managing the distance between themselves and the rest of the world. She wrote that she thought they might, if given enough time and enough honesty and enough space to do it at their own pace, be good for each other. She was not prescribing, she was noting. The third page was short. You will want to run, not from him, from the part of it that asks you to stay. You have always run before anyone could ask you to leave, which is a kind of survival and also a kind of loss. And I think you have been losing things this way for longer than you know. Stay, Myra, not for the money or the house or the title or any of the things that look like reasons when you look at them from outside. Stay because you are allowed to be somewhere that does not require you to earn the right to exist in it. Stay because you deserve to see what happens when something is allowed to become what it could be. Stay because I am asking you to, and because you know I would not ask you to do something that was not true. Stay. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The clock said 11:59. The kitchen was warm. Outside the hills were dark shapes against a sky that had no light competition, and the house was quiet around her with the specific quality of quiet that this house had, full quiet, occupied quiet, the quiet of a place that was simply itself. She went upstairs. She put the letter in the drawer in the nightstand, the drawer where she had been keeping things, the stone from the garden, the bookmark, Edric's card, the note from the first morning, the small collection of things that were hers. She put the letter in with them. She lay down. She looked at the ceiling of the corner room. She thought about the word stay. She held it up to the light of her own attention and looked at all its sides. She thought about what it asked of her, not the performance of staying, not the toleration of staying, but the actual thing, the willingness to be somewhere past the point where the exit was still available, past the habit of keeping one foot angled toward the door. She was aware of the habit. She had been aware of it for several days, watching herself keep track of exits and distances, calculating how long it would take to be somewhere else if she needed to be. It was structural. It had been structural for years. The Voss house had built it, and before the Voss house other things had built it, and before that things she did not think about directly. She thought about Hilda writing stay with the certainty of someone who had thought about it carefully and believed it was possible. She thought about the specific weight of being told you could do something by someone who knew you well enough to know it was true. She fell asleep. In the morning she was awake before the light, which was normal. She made tea and went to the library and sat in the chair by the window instead of standing at the shelves, and she looked at the hills going from dark to gold in the slow way that hills went from dark to gold when there was enough time to watch the whole process, and she felt, clearly and without qualification, and without the need to examine the feeling further, that she was somewhere she was going to be. Edric came back at noon. She was at the catalog desk. She heard his car on the drive. She heard his coat go on the hook. She heard him in the hallway, approaching. "I read the letter," she said before he reached the doorway. A pause, then his footsteps to the chair. He sat. "She was right about most of it," Myra said. She did not look up from the entry she was making. "It's somewhat annoying." "She usually was," he said. "I found it irritating with great consistency over 40 years. She glanced up. He looked. She found the word after a moment, fond. The very specific fond of someone thinking about someone they will not see again. "She said she thought we might be good for each other," Myra said, "if given enough time and enough space." He was quiet. "I think she was probably right about that too," Myra said, "but I wanted to say it out loud, so it was said." She looked back at the catalog. He said nothing. She made another entry. The quiet of the library held both of them without asking either of them to be anything other than what they were, and outside the hills turned through the colors of the afternoon, and the catalog grew entry by entry toward what it should have been for 30 years, and she was somewhere she had chosen, and the choosing was holding. The histories arrived the way they arrived, which was gradually, in context, summoned by the present rather than delivered as a prepared account. She learned things about him the way you learned things about someone you lived alongside, through the accumulation of small details that added up over time to a picture you could not have assembled any other way. She was not a person who pushed for the full story before she had earned the context. She was a person who waited and watched and asked specific questions when she had enough information to know what she was asking. She learned about the previous library, lost in the early years of the 20th century in circumstances he named briefly and did not elaborate on. She understood from the brevity that the elaboration was there but was not yet hers. She filed this. She learned that he had a correspondence with 6 people who were still alive and who knew what he was. He had chosen to maintain these correspondences deliberately, he said, when he had recognized in the 1970s that the alternative was becoming something he described as simply narrowed. She understood what he meant by this without requiring the description to be expanded. She learned that he had traveled extensively and had found, over time, that his preference for the north was not circumstantial, something about the quality of the light, the way the landscape made no particular argument for itself. He found that preferable to landscapes that were trying to be something. She learned that there had been, once, someone he had nearly married. He mentioned this on a Thursday evening in the library, in the way that significant things sometimes emerged, not as an opening, not as an invitation to pursue it, but as a piece of information that needed to be known, offered in the only way he could currently offer it. She noted it. She did not ask. She understood from his manner that this was a door that would open, or it would not, and that trying the handle before it was ready would accomplish nothing useful. She filed it in the category of things she did not yet know. This category was large, and she was comfortable with it being large, because she was beginning to understand that knowing a person was a project that had no deadline, and that this was one of the better things about it. On the 21st morning she woke up and registered, with the clarity that came to her in those first quiet minutes, that she had been here for 3 weeks. 3 weeks was not long. 3 weeks was exactly as long as the thing she was building inside herself had needed so far. She lay still for a moment and thought about the suitcase under the bed. She thought about it being empty. She had emptied it by increments, item by item. Things moved to drawers and shelves and hooks without ceremony or decision, and now the suitcase was under the bed as suitcases were under beds when you lived somewhere rather than staying somewhere on a temporary basis. She had not marked the moment it changed. She had simply registered now that it had. She got up. She made tea. She went to the library. He was already there. This had started happening in the second week, their early morning habits converging in the same room without either of them planning it. She came in and he was at the desk, and she went to the shelves, and the room held both of them with the ease of a space that was large enough and settled enough to do so without requiring them to negotiate who was where. The 1900s, she said. There are significant gaps in the early decades, he said. I know, I want to start filling some of them. Can I order books? The acquisition account is in the third drawer on the left. She had not known this, thank you. She opened the drawer and found the account details and wrote them in the notebook next to the list of gaps she had been building. Then she went to the shelves and continued from where she had left off the previous evening. After a while he looked up from his desk. Third shelf from the end on the left side, he said. Third row from the bottom, green spine. She found it. She read the title. She read it again. She turned around. This is the book, she said, from the Edinburgh auction. Yes. You and Hilda argued over this specific book. We did, she won. She sent it to me 3 months later with a note saying she was giving it back and that she had won it so it was hers to give. He paused. She also said it was too beautiful to belong to only one person. Myra looked at the book in her hands, the green spine worn at the top where many hands had picked it up over many years, the slight foxing on the pages, the evidence of a life of use. She thought about a woman at a book auction in Edinburgh arguing over something she wanted and winning, and then giving it away. And this was so precisely Hilda that it produced in her a wave of specific grief that she was not prepared for and did not try to deflect. She sat down in the nearest chair. She held the book. He went back to his work. She sat with the grief in the way she was learning to sit with things, not pushing it away, not redirecting it into something useful, just holding it and letting it be the size it was. It was the size of 40 years of friendship and 40 years of letters and 2 years of Tuesday mornings, and a soft-boiled egg with a precise timing, and a woman who had said your name like it was simply what you were called. After a while she set the book carefully on the shelf beside the chair and picked up the catalogue and went back to work. The library was quiet. She made another entry. The legal challenge arrived on a Monday in an envelope that looked like all the other formal correspondence she had received, which was to say completely ordinary from the outside, which was one of the more interesting things about legal challenges. They did not announce themselves with their weight. She brought it to Edric's desk. He read it, he set it down. She read it after him. She took her time with it, reading the formal language slowly and extracting the actual argument from its casing. The argument was, she had manipulated an elderly woman. She had engineered an intimate relationship over a period of 2 years with the deliberate purpose of redirecting the estate. The marriage was the mechanism of the manipulation. The court should examine the will. She set the document on the desk. She looked at the window. I want to write my own statement, she said, not have someone draft it for me to sign. The words need to be mine. That's within your rights, he said. I know it is. I want to know if it creates any complications. The solicitor reviews it for form before submission, not content. Good, she said. She went upstairs. She sat at the desk in the corner room and opened the notebook to a clean page and wrote for 2 hours without stopping. She wrote about everything in the correct order, starting with the suitcase and the back stairs and ending with the bathroom floor and the podcast about deep ocean creatures and a paralegal named Ben in a doorway saying the word beneficiary. She wrote it in simple, direct sentences because simple, direct sentences were harder to argue against than complicated ones. She wrote about Tuesday mornings and the name and the egg. She wrote about 2 years of not being called anything except the girl and how that worked, the specific erosion of it, the way it produced a kind of blankness in you over time that was not the same as acceptance but that functioned similarly. She read it back. 23 pages. She took the notebook downstairs and found him in the library. I want you to read it before the solicitor does, she said. You knew Hilda, you know what she described to you. If there's a gap between what I've written and what she observed, I want to know before it goes anywhere official. He took the notebook. She went to make tea. She sat at the kitchen table and thought about the 23 pages and what it meant to have written them. She had been the version of herself that had cleaned that bathroom and sat on that floor for 2 years, and that version was true, and now the version of her that wrote about it was also true, and the space between the two versions was where the story lived. He came to the kitchen 20 minutes later. He set the notebook on the table. He stood at the counter. 2 things, he said, that Hilda mentioned to me that aren't in what you've written. Tell me. He described a specific evening in the first month when she had been publicly instructed in front of guests to clear a table she had not set. A small thing, she had almost forgotten it, she wrote it in the margin. He described something Hilda had noted about the way Myra moved through doorways, the habit of pausing, checking, confirming she was wanted in a room before entering it. Hilda had described it as the posture of someone who had learned their presence required justification. She wrote this in the margin. Does it say what it needs to say? She asked. He was quiet for the moment of honest assessment. It says exactly what happened, he said. That's all I was trying to do, she said. She closed the notebook. The hearing was scheduled for February. She had several weeks. She spent those weeks continuing the catalogue, which was through 1920 now and moving forward. She spent them at dinner asking questions about the collection and having the questions answered. She spent them in the window seat in the mornings with her tea going cold and the hills shifting through their winter colors, and in the library in the evenings with the fire that Clara made up at 4 o'clock, and gradually in the places of the house that she had not yet made fully hers, which she was making hers the way you made things yours, by using them, by coming back to them, by being in them until they recognized you. She thought about the hearing. She thought about what it meant to stand in a room and say these things out loud, with the Voss family across from her and a judge at the front and her 23 pages in her hand. She thought about the seminar in library school where she had been asked to defend a cataloging decision she had made, and where she had done it clearly and without apology, and where the professor had said afterward that she had the most rigorous analytical approach in the class. She had been surprised at the time. She was less surprised now. She had always known what she had done. She had just not always felt she was in a room where the knowing mattered. She was going to be in a room where it mattered. She was going to be ready. She wore dark blue to the hearing and felt, in it, exactly the signal she intended to send. Edric was in the gallery. She had asked him to be, not at the table with her. She wanted to be the person in the room but present, which was different from absent in a way she could not have articulated precisely but understood completely. The courtroom was a room like other rooms arranged for authority, the raised position at the front, the rows, the weight of the ceiling. She had been in rooms arranged for authority before. She had learned to look at what the room was doing rather than feeling what it wanted her to feel, which was the difference between being inside the arrangement and being underneath it. She sat down. The Voss family was across the aisle. Petra with her strategic calm, Owen with his professional presence, Diane with her structural composure, the London solicitor with his briefcase and his specific combination of certainty and flexibility that expensive solicitors wore the way other people wore professional clothing. She looked at them once, then she looked at the front of the room. When she was called, she stood and walked to the front at her own pace. She faced the room. She gave her statement. She gave it in the order she had written it, with the clarity she had trained into the writing simple sentences, specific details, nothing embellished and nothing underplayed. The back stairs, the name, the Tuesday mornings. She gave it without performing emotion and without suppressing it. She had been there. She was describing what had been there. The description was sufficient. The opposing solicitor asked his questions. She answered them. Then, can you describe the nature of your relationship with Hilda Voss in her final months? She looked at him. She sat with me in the kitchen on Tuesday mornings, she said, for 2 years, without needing anything from me. She talked about books and a trip to Oslo and the right way to cook an egg. She used my name every time. In a house where I was referred to by role rather than name, she called me Myra every single time without having to be reminded. She looked at the room. You're asking whether her affection was genuine, she said. Whether a woman who managed her own affairs for 30 years and planned her own memorial and maintained a correspondence with a friend for 40 years understood what she was doing when she wrote a will. A pause. She wrote me a letter. I didn't read it until after she was gone. She described in that letter that I had a habit of leaving before anyone could ask me to stay. She asked me to stop. That is not the letter of someone who was confused. That is the letter of someone who had paid very close attention. She sat down. She looked at the gallery. Edric was looking at the courtroom floor. She held this image for a moment. A man who had sat with her through weeks of preparation, who had read 23 pages and found 2 things she had left out and told her about them without being asked to do anything further. A man who had opened a door, who had asked her to tell him before she left rather than after, who had said he would rather carry the eventual weight of it than not. Looking at the floor, she understood from this image something that she had been approaching for several weeks. She did not name it immediately. She held it the way she held things that needed time, and the hearing continued around her, and she was present for it, and she was also, somewhere slightly beneath the present, turning the unnamed thing carefully in her hands. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived like all the other legal envelopes. She opened it at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning with a cup of tea at her elbow. The challenge was dismissed. The will was upheld. She read it again, she set it on the table. She looked out at the hills, which were in the first week of March and had begun their slow turn toward the green that would become spring, the tentative pre-commitment to a new season, the beginning of the beginning. "We won," she called when she heard him in the hallway. He came to the kitchen doorway and read the information from her face before the document. "Yes," he said. "The estate is mine. It was always yours." She thought about this. The estate had always been hers. The process had been about making others accept what was already true. She understood from this framing something about all the other things in her life that had always been hers, and that other people had spent a long time not accepting. "I'm not going back to the Voss house," she said. "I want to be clear." "I expected nothing else," he said. She set the envelope on the shelf with the other documents. She looked at the window, she looked at him. He was standing in the doorway in his coat, hands in his pockets, with the specific quality of attention he gave to her that she had learned over 7 weeks to simply receive. "I want to tell you something," she said. He waited. She wrote in the letter that she thought we might be good for each other. She looked at the hills. "I think she was right. I think I've known she was right for a few weeks now." She looked back at him. I wanted to say it out loud so it was said and not just understood. He was quiet. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I'm not going to run." She paused. "I notice the pull toward it sometimes. I've been practicing noticing it without following it." He looked at her for a moment with the expression that she had come to understand was the expression he produced when something landed in a place he had not been expecting to receive it. "The village," he said. "I'm going for the tea. We're running low." "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He went. She stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the hills through the window, and the hills were beginning their spring, and the house was warm around her, and somewhere in the village a man who had agreed not to refuse was buying loose-leaf tea because that was the kind of tea she made, and she had been making it here for 7 weeks, and she was going to keep making it here, and the catalogue was through 1920 and still going, and the corner room was hers, and the window seat was hers. And the drawer in the nightstand held a stone and a bookmark and 2 cards and a letter that had said stay. She had stayed. She was going to keep staying. She put the kettle on. She got the notebook. She went to the library. She opened the catalogue to where she had left off and picked up her pen and made the next entry, and the one after that, and the one after that. And the morning came in through the windows without asking permission, and found her there, working, present. Hers and the hills outside were turning towards spring with the slow and absolute commitment of things that had been doing this for a very long time, and had never once stopped. She made another entry. She was going to keep making entries. She was somewhere she had chosen, and the choosing held, and the morning was exactly this and nothing less, and that was enough. That was more than enough. It was, she thought, with the specific gratitude of someone who had waited a long time for it and had not stopped waiting. It was precisely what she had always deserved. The days after the judgment settled into Myra like good weather, not dramatic, not sudden, but a gradual warming that she noticed only when she stopped to compare it to how things had been before. She kept updating the catalogue. This was the thing she came back to every morning after tea, the task that had started as a project and had become something closer to a practice. She was through the 1920s now, working into the 1930s, and the collection got thicker here, richer, more idiosyncratic. The books of someone who had been paying attention to specific arguments rather than building a comprehensive record. She could see Edric's particular interests accumulating across the decades. The natural history of the North, certain strands of philosophy, the history of cartography, and something harder to name, a thread of texts about people who had lived in places for a very long time and what that had done to them. She asked him about this thread on a Wednesday in late March, because by March she had been asking him things for long enough to know that he answered questions directly when they were direct questions. "You collected books about duration," she said. She was at the catalogue desk. He was reading in the chair by the window. She had a habit now of working things out partly out loud, in the direction of the room, because she had learned that he listened and occasionally said something useful. Not about age, about what it means to stay somewhere for a very long time, what it does to a place, what it does to a person. He looked up from his book. He turned this over. "I didn't categorize it that way when I was acquiring them," he said, "but you're probably right." "What does it do," she asked, "to a person in your experience?" He set the book down on his knee. This was his gesture for real consideration. The book went down, the full attention came up. "It depends on how you do it," he said. "Duration without attention produces a kind of sediment. Things layer on top of each other, and eventually you stop being able to distinguish what is genuinely yours and what is simply old. You inherit your own past without choosing it. And with attention it is different. The long time becomes legible. You can read it. You know what each layer is and when it arrived and what it changed." A pause. Hilda used to say it was the difference between a person who had lived 100 years and a person who had lived 1 year 100 times. Myra thought about this. She looked at the shelves. "Which one were you?" He was quiet for a moment, honest quiet. "Both at different periods," he said, "the latter more recently than I was comfortable admitting." She turned back to the catalogue. "And now?" "Now," he said, "I'm keeping better records." She made the next entry. She heard him pick his book back up. She thought about the records she had not kept. 2 years in the Voss house of which she could recall, in genuine detail, only the Tuesday mornings. Everything else had blurred event into event, day into day, the way things blurred when you were not paying attention to them because paying attention to them required more of yourself than you had available. She had been surviving. Survival was a different mode of operation from living, and the catalogue the two of them produced was different in kind. She had been paying attention since she arrived here. She had been paying attention with the specific care of someone who understood they were somewhere worth noticing. In April the gardener came twice a week rather than once, and the working beds in the garden became active, and Myra started going outside after her morning reading hour and before breakfast. This was not something she had planned. She had simply found herself outside one morning with her tea, standing in the part of the garden that had been given over to its own judgment, looking at what had decided to grow there. A mix of things, some clearly descended from plants that had been deliberately put there in other decades, some that had arrived without being invited and had simply continued. She found it interesting. The logic of an untended patch of land was a different logic from the logic of a curated one, but it was still a logic. Douglas the gardener, who came on Wednesdays and Saturdays now, was a man of few words who had strong views about soil composition, and who looked at Myra the first time he found her in the untended corner with the expression of someone assessing whether she was going to cause a problem. She looked back at him. She asked about the plants she didn't recognize. He told her. She asked 2 follow-up questions and he answered both, and after that he regarded her with the provisional respect of a person who had asked the right questions, which was all he required of people. She told Edric about the conversation at dinner. "Douglas is not easily impressed," he said. He was not impressed, she said. He was willing to continue talking. "There's a difference." He had the almost smile she had catalogued over weeks. "Yes," he said, "there is." She thought about the conversations she had been cataloguing, the way she catalogued the books, by what they said and when, by what they revealed about the person speaking them. She had learned a great deal from the conversations and a great deal from the silences, and the two together were building a picture of him that was more complete than anything she had arrived with and less complete than it would eventually be, and the incompleteness was not frustrating. It was simply where they were in the process. She thought about what he had said in February in the kitchen when she had told him she was not going anywhere. He had not made it large, he had gone to buy tea. She had thought about that at the time and had continued thinking about it since, the way she thought about things that were true and that she needed to arrive at in her own time. She had arrived at it in the days just after the judgment, when the pressure of the legal process was gone and what remained was simply the ordinary shape of her days here. She had looked at that shape and recognized it. Not from before, she had not had this shape before. She recognized it from the direction she had been moving in, the way you recognized a destination you had been traveling toward before you were quite conscious of traveling. She told him on an evening in April. They were in the library, she was at the catalog desk, he was in his chair. "I want to say something," she said. He looked up. "I've been thinking about what you said in January," she said, "about preferring to carry the weight of it rather than not, about the narrowing and what it had done." He was quiet. "I think," she worked to say it accurately because accuracy was important here, "I think I understand now what Hilda was doing, not just for me, for both of us. She was sending us toward each other because she thought we would recognize something in each other, the particular way of having been reduced, by different circumstances and different centuries, but the same basic operation." He did not say anything. "I think she was right," Myra said. "I think I've thought she was right for a while. I wanted to say it out loud rather than just knowing it." She looked back at the catalogue. He was quiet for a moment longer than usual. Then, "She was, on certain matters, exceptionally right," he said. "This appears to be one of them." She made the next entry. The library held them in the right kind of quiet, and outside the April light came through the window that faced west and lay across the floor in long pale bars, and the catalogue grew, and she was exactly where she was. In May, Myra went back to the Voss estate for the first time since she had left it. Not because she wanted to. Because there were things there that were hers, the small accumulation of 2 years of a life, books she had bought, clothes she had bought, her library science textbooks with her notes in the margins that were an ongoing argument she had been having with herself about the right way to organize certain kinds of collections. These were small things. She could have left them. She had left things before in other places because the things were not worth what the leaving required. These were worth it, and more than that, she wanted to be the person who went back for them. Not because it was practical, but because she had spent 2 years not being that person, and she was practicing being a different one. Edric offered to come with her. She said no, and then she thought about it more carefully, which was a thing she had been trying to do, thinking about things more carefully before the reflexive no, looking at whether the no was genuine or habitual. "Yes," she said on second thought, "if you're willing to." He was. They drove north to south rather than south to north, which meant the hills gradually became the city, and then the city became the particular neighborhood, and then the particular street, and then the estate gates, which were closed, which was how they were during the day now that no one had the need or the permission to come and go freely. She had called Petra the week before to arrange a time. The conversation had been brief and civil in the way that conversations were civil, when the people having them had accepted an outcome they could not change and were managing the aftermath with whatever dignity was available to them. Petra had said an hour on a Thursday morning would work. Myra had said yes, that was the whole of it. The house looked the same, smaller than she remembered it, which was always the way with things you had left, they shrank in the leaving. The roses along the east wall were beginning again, the cycle she had watched for 2 years, and she looked at them from a different angle now, from the front of the house instead of the kitchen window. Petra met them at the door. She looked at Edric, then at Myra. She said, correctly and with very little additional expression, that the room was as it had been, and Myra was welcome to take whatever she needed. Myra went upstairs. She went up the main staircase. She went down the main corridor. She went to the door of the small bedroom at the end and pushed it open. The room was exactly as she had left it, radiator, stuck window, bed with the suitcase that had never been fully unpacked beside it. Except the suitcase was empty now. Someone had taken out what was in it and stacked everything on the bed, which was either practical or a small gesture of something she did not need to interpret. She looked at the room. She thought about 2 years of waking up in it, the particular quality of the ceiling when she was trying to sleep, the sound of the house below her when she was awake before everyone else, the way the morning came through the stuck window sideways, the particular angle of it. She packed what was hers carefully and efficiently, which was the way she did everything. The books, the clothes, the textbooks with the margin notes, the small mug from the charity shop that she had already moved to Vale House. She had not realized she had already moved it until she noticed it was not here to pack. She took one more thing. In the corner of the wardrobe, behind a coat she had left hanging because it had not seemed worth taking, there was a small framed photograph she had put there in the first month, and had not moved because she had not wanted it where it could be seen, and had not wanted it where she could not find it. It was a photograph of her parents, taken before she was old enough to appear in photographs. They were young in it, younger than she was now, and they were looking at the camera with the expression of people who did not yet know what was coming, which was every expression anyone had ever had in a photograph when you thought about it correctly. She put the photograph in the bag. She closed the bag. She looked at the room one more time. It had never been hers. She had known that from the beginning, but she had lived in it and she had made things work in it, and she was taking herself out of it now with everything that mattered, and that was, she thought, a reasonable accounting. She went downstairs. Edric was in the entrance hall. He had not gone to wait in the car, which she had half expected. He was standing in the entrance hall with his hands in his pockets, looking at the portrait of Hilda's mother on the wall across from the staircase, which was a portrait that had always watched Myra with painted reproach. "Ready?" he said without turning. "Yes," she said. He held the door. She walked through it and did not look back. In the car heading north, she held the bag on her lap and watched England return to itself, city to countryside to hills, the sequence running in reverse, and she thought about the photograph. Her parents, young, not yet knowing. She thought about what Hilda had written in the letter about the rooms that had never been hers and about staying somewhere long enough to find out what happened when something was given time. She thought about what was happening. She thought about the catalogue, which was through the 1930s and moving forward. She thought about the corner room with the window seat and the view of the hills. She thought about Douglas in the garden and the untended corner that had decided for itself what it wanted to grow. She thought about dinners at the table in the kitchen, and the fire in the library, and the easy, unhurried quality of evenings in a house where no one was being managed. She thought about the morning she would wake up in the corner room tomorrow, and the tea she would make, and the library she would go to. She looked out the window at the hills returning. She was going home. This was a thought she had not had about anywhere in a very long time, and she let it be exactly what it was. In June, the library acquisitions started arriving. She had spent 2 months compiling the order, working through the gap list she had built across the first weeks, cross-referencing with the catalogue, looking for the right editions of the right books from the right periods to fill the specific holes in the argument the collection made. She had bought from 3 different sources, 2 antiquarian booksellers and 1 specialist dealer in natural history texts whom she had found through a contact at the university library. She had emailed on a Thursday afternoon because she needed the expertise and did not have it herself. The boxes started arriving on a Tuesday. She unpacked them in the library with the specific pleasure of someone who has ordered exactly what they needed and is now receiving exactly what they ordered. Edric was at the desk. He watched her unpack the first box and then the second, and she could feel his attention without looking up from what she was doing. "First edition," he said, when she set a small green volume on the table. 1884, slightly damaged in the spine but sound otherwise. I found a description online and confirmed it with the dealer before I bought it. "You confirmed it yourself?" I asked specific questions about the binding and the frontispiece. He described both correctly. She set another book on the table. "The 1870s gap is filled now. These 3 books take care of the missing section and the argument is continuous again." He looked at the 3 books on the table. He was quiet for a moment. "This is the best the catalogue has been in 30 years, he said. "I know," she said. "The 1940s are next. There's a significant gap from 1941 to 1947. "The war," he said. She looked up. "You couldn't acquire books during the war." "I could," he said. "I chose not to." A brief pause. "I spent several years being angry at what was happening and directing the anger at things I could control, including what I was willing to acquire." He looked at the table. "Hilda used to say I had made the library into a record of my moods, which was not what a library was for." "She wasn't wrong," Myra said. "No," he said. "Did you tell her that?" Eventually, he said, in approximately 1988. She almost smiled. She looked back at the boxes. I found some good candidates for the 1940s section. They're in the next order. I wanted to ask you first, are you willing to fill the gap, or would you rather leave it as a record of what happened? He was quiet for a longer moment than usual. Fill it, he said. The argument is more important than the record of my mood. She nodded once and wrote it in the notebook. They worked in the library for the rest of the morning, she unpacking and cataloging the new acquisitions, he reviewing whatever he had been reviewing, and outside the June light came through the west window and moved across the floor in the way it moved in this room in this season, which she knew now because she had been here long enough to see the seasons change the room. She had been here long enough to see the seasons change the room. She thought about this, about the specific quality of a duration you had been conscious of, about the difference between 100 years lived in a year versus 1 year lived consciously. She was paying attention. She was going to keep paying attention. She made the next catalog entry. He looked up from his desk. There's something I want to show you, he said, when you have a moment. She finished the entry she was making. Now. Yes. He took her to the study. He opened the bottom drawer of the large desk in the corner, which she had not seen opened before. All the other drawers she had used for things, but this one she had assumed was personal. He lifted out a wooden box, old, about the size of a shoebox, and set it on the desk. These are the letters, he said, all of them. Hers. She looked at the box. 40 years, he said, written on the same paper in the same hand with the blue seal. She looked at him. You've kept them all. Yes, he set his hand on the lid of the box but did not open it. I would like, if you are willing, to read them to you, not all at once, over time, the ones about the things we've talked about, the ones about her. He paused, about you. She thought about this, about what it meant to be given that, the private record of a friendship offered. Yes, she said, I'd like that. He opened the box. The letters were folded in order, tied in small bundles by year, each bundle with the year written on a strip of paper in his precise, unhurried hand. 40 bundles. A decade of bundles at the front, thinner, from the early years. The later bundles thicker, the letters longer, the relationship having deepened into the kind of friendship where you wrote more because more had accumulated. She looked at the bundles. She thought about Hilda in her 70s in the last months picking up a pen, writing to this man, describing the girl in the kitchen on Tuesday mornings, writing with the deliberate precision of someone who wanted to be understood and who knew she was running out of time to ensure it. She thought about what it meant to be cared for by someone who was gone, the specific quality of it, the way it arrived in objects and evidence and in letters someone else had kept for 40 years. Start wherever you think is right, she said. He took a bundle from near the middle. He began to read. The conversation she had been waiting to have arrived, the way conversations sometimes arrived, in the middle of something else. It was a July evening. They were in the kitchen after dinner, which was where they often were in the hour after dinner, because the kitchen had a quality in the evening that the library and the drawing room did not, something warmer and more without ceremony, and they had both independently arrived at the preference for it. She was reading. He was looking at something on the table that she understood from the quality of his attention to be a letter, not from the correspondence, which they had been reading through together over weeks, but something current, from one of the 6 living correspondences he maintained. He set the letter down. He looked at the window. There is something I told you I would tell you eventually, he said. She set her book down. The person I almost married, he said. You have not asked about it. I was waiting, she said. Yes, he said, I know. He looked at the table. I want to tell you, not because it changes anything about now, because you should know. She waited. He told her. It had been in the 16th century. Her name was Catherine. She had been a person of quiet intelligence and strong convictions, and she had known what he was from the beginning of their acquaintance, which was extremely unusual for the period, and which had been partly what made the acquaintance so significant. Most of his interactions with the living in that period were managed, carefully contained, conducted at a distance, never permitted to become the kind of thing where someone could be hurt by his nature or by the longevity he carried that they did not. Catherine had refused containment. She had been fully aware of what he was, and had found it interesting rather than alarming, and had argued with him about it with the same directness she brought to everything else. He had found himself, for the first time in the several centuries he had been living carefully, in a relationship that was entirely unmanaged. They had talked about marriage for 2 years, had come close to it, and then she had died not from him, not from anything related to what he was, simply from the ordinary causes of mortality in a period when ordinary causes of mortality were extremely varied and not remotely equitable. A fever in the winter that she did not survive. She had been 34 years old. He had not come close to it again. He said all of this in the same way he said most important things, clearly, without performance in the order in which it had happened. He looked at the table for most of it. He looked at her at the end. "You asked," he said, "some time ago whether grief worked differently for me, whether the longevity changed it." "Yes," she said. "It did," he said, "not in the way that I expected it to. I expected the centuries to make it smaller. They made it precise. I carry her in a very specific place, very clearly defined. She does not disappear with time. She becomes more exactly herself." He was quiet. "Everyone I have lost is like that now, Hilda also." Myra sat with this. She thought about grief working that way, about what it meant to carry a person with increasing precision rather than diminishing clarity. She thought about her own grief, which was not old enough yet to know what it was becoming. She thought about the quality of the corner room in the evenings when she was alone in it, the way certain things arrived and then settled. "Catherine sounds," she said carefully, "like someone who knew what she wanted." "She did," he said. "It was one of her most reliable qualities." "And you loved her," Myra said. This was not a question. She said it because it needed to be said, acknowledged, given its correct weight. "Yes," he said. She nodded. "I'm telling you this," he said, "not as a warning, not as a context that changes the shape of now, simply because you should know it as a complete accounting of who I am." He looked at her. "You have given me the equivalent over months." It seemed time. She thought about the equivalent, the 23 pages, the conversations, the things she had said and not said and said eventually. She thought about the specific completeness of being known by someone. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. She picked up her book. He picked up his letter. The kitchen held them in the evening quiet that was full rather than empty, the quiet of two people who were somewhere they had chosen to be. Outside, the July dark had settled completely over the hills, and the stars were the kind of stars that appeared when there was no light to compete with them. And the house was warm, and Myra thought about Catherine, who had been 34 and known what she wanted, and about Hilda, who had been 71 and known what she wanted, and about the specific thread of women who knew what they wanted that seemed to run through this particular man's life, and she thought that this said something true about him. She made a note of it in the back of the notebook she used for thinking in grids. She would look at it again later, when she had more information to put beside it. The letter she was least expecting arrived in August. It was from Petra. Not from the London solicitor, not from the firm that had filed the challenge. From Petra, in Petra's handwriting, on an envelope with no return address, and a stamp affixed slightly crookedly in the way stamps were affixed by people who did not often write physical letters and had misjudged the corner. She brought it to the kitchen table and opened it. It was 2 pages. She read it once quickly and then again slowly, which was how she read things that surprised her, once to get the content and once to understand the shape of it. Petra wrote that she had been thinking, since the judgment, about certain things. She did not apologize directly. This was not the kind of letter that apologized directly, but she organized the 2 pages around a series of specific acknowledgments that amounted, cumulatively, to something that was very close to an apology. She acknowledged that the 2 years had been unequal. She acknowledged that the word "the girl" had been a specific diminishment rather than a casual shorthand. She acknowledged that the legal challenge had been motivated by more than a state law, and that the motivation, honestly examined, did not reflect well on the people who had made the decision to file. She said that she did not know what Myra's plans were, or whether she had any interest in any ongoing relationship with the family. She said she understood if the answer was no. She said only that she wanted the acknowledgement to exist and to be direct rather than implied. That was the whole of it. Myra read it a 3rd time. She sat with it for a while. She thought about what it cost Petra to write this. She thought about what she knew of Petra, which was substantial if not deep, 2 years of close proximity had produced a thorough knowledge of how Petra operated, what she protected, what the expensive strategy cost her. This letter was not cheap. It was the kind of thing you wrote when you had sat with something for months and had decided that not writing it was more expensive than writing it. She put the letter in the drawer with the other things she kept: the stone, the bookmark, the cards, Hilda's letter. She thought about what she was going to do with it. She thought about Hilda, who had believed in the kind of generosity that cost something, not the comfortable kind, not the kind that preserved you while appearing to give, the kind that required you to reach past the comfortable version of yourself. She wrote back. Not that day. She let it sit for a week, which was how she approached things that required the right words. She wrote back on a Sunday morning at the desk in the corner room with the view of the hills in the August haze, and she wrote 2 pages in return. She did not match Petra's careful indirection with her own. She wrote directly. She said that she had received the letter and had thought about it carefully. She said that she believed the acknowledgement was genuine and that she valued it. She said that she did not know yet what an ongoing relationship with the family looked like, or whether it was something she wanted, and that she needed more time to arrive at that answer. She said, "I know that Hilda loved all of you, in the complicated way that you love people who are difficult, and I think she would have wanted the difficulty to resolve into something better than it has been. I don't know if that's possible. I'm not ruling it out." She sent the letter. She told Edric about it at dinner. He listened with the full attention he brought to things that mattered. "Do you want me to have an opinion about it?" he said. "No," she said, "I wanted to tell you." "That's different from wanting an opinion." He nodded. "All right." "It felt right to tell you," she said. "It's part of what's happening." "Yes," he said. She ate the rest of her dinner. She thought about what was happening. She had been thinking about it for weeks, not anxiously, not with the running calculation she used for things that threatened her, but with the careful attention she brought to things she wanted to understand. She had been thinking about the shape of what was growing here and what it was growing into and what she wanted it to become. She had arrived at some answers. She was working toward others. She thought the ones she was working toward would come in their own time, and she was, for the first time in a long time, comfortable with that. September brought the first cold, and with the first cold came a change in the light that Myra noticed with the specific attention she had developed over the months for the way this place changed across seasons. The summer light had been direct, long, lying in bars across the library floor. The September light was lower and more considered, coming in at an angle that made different things visible. She had been here for 7 months. 7 months was not a long time. 7 months was the longest she had stayed anywhere since she was 8 years old, and the places had started being temporary. She had lived in 5 different places in the years between 8 and 22, each one requiring her to become a slightly different version of herself, to adjust, to compress, to find the minimum viable version of her that the space would accommodate. She had not compressed here. She had expanded here, which was a different operation entirely. She had expanded into the catalogue and into the garden conversations with Douglas and into the mornings at the window seat and into the dinners and the evenings in the library and the letters read aloud from a box in the study. She had expanded into the practice of having opinions and expressing them and having the expressions received without requiring management. She had expanded into the practice of staying. She thought about this on a September morning in the library, with the autumn light coming in at its new angle and the catalogue open to the 1940s, which were filling in now, the gap that had been a record of a mood becoming instead a part of the argument. Edric came in around 9. He looked at the catalogue and then at her. "The 1940s, he said. "Almost done," she said. "The last 2 books in the order come next week." He sat in his chair, he opened his book, he looked up after a moment. "There is something I want to ask you," he said. "Go ahead." "The terms of the arrangement," he said. "The original terms, the 30 days, the cohabitation requirement." She looked up. "Yes." "We have been here 7 months," he said. "We are well past the terms." "Yes," she said. "We are." "The will specified 30 days," he said. "It did not specify what came after." She set down her pen. She looked at him. He was looking at the window, not at her, which she had learned was his way of saying something he was working to say accurately. "I am not asking about the estate," he said. "The estate is yours and that is not what I'm discussing. I am asking," he paused. I would like to know what terms you would want. If we were to negotiate them now, having been here 7 months rather than 1, what would you want the terms to be? She sat with this. She had thought about this question before, not in exactly these terms, not as a negotiation of terms, but in the form it actually took, which was, what is this, what is it becoming, what do I want it to become? She had been working toward those answers. She had some of them now. I want to be asked, she said, when things change or might change, not informed after, asked. Yes, he said. I want the catalogue, she said, to continue and to be mine, not a task you've assigned me, mine. It has always been yours, he said. I know, I want it stated. Stated, he said. She thought about how to say the next part. She had been thinking about it for 2 months and she still was not sure she had the right words, so she went with the most accurate ones she had. I want to know what you want this to be, not what the will specified, what you want. He was quiet. He looked at the window for a long moment. I want it to be what it has been, he said, for the next very long time. He turned and looked at her. I want you here not because of the arrangement, because of who you are, he paused. I want to keep reading you the letters. I want to show you what the library looks like when the 1940s gap is filled. I want you to tell me when you've figured out what the untended corner of the garden is trying to become. Another pause. I want to negotiate whatever terms you need. I want to negotiate them honestly, and I want them to actually hold. She looked at him. She thought about the first morning she had arrived and the window seat, and the 12 minutes, and the specific quality of a door opening. I want that too, she said. He nodded. The catalogue was open on the desk between them, and the autumn light was coming in at its new angle, and the hills outside the window were beginning their long turn toward the colors of autumn. And the house was quiet around them in the way that this house was quiet, full quiet, the quiet of a place that was inhabited and not held at a distance. We should write it down, she said, the new terms. Yes, he said. Not now, she said, but soon, formally, so they exist. Yes. She picked up her pen. She made the next catalogue entry. He picked up his book. Outside the hills were amber and gold, and the season was changing, turning toward its next self with the slow, certain commitment of things that knew how to do it. And Myra Voss was in a library she was in the process of completing, in a house she had stayed in a life she had chosen, and the choosing was the most solid thing she had felt under her feet in a very long time. She was going to keep choosing. She made another entry. The catalogue grew. The morning continued. And that was enough. Myra had always been good at knowing when something was going to happen before it happened. Not in the mystical sense, she did not believe in anything that could not be observed. She meant simply that she had learned, over years of being a careful reader of situations, to notice when the internal logic of something was pointing toward a conclusion. You watched the argument long enough and you could see where it was going, not because the future was fixed, but because some things, once in motion, were going to arrive somewhere specific. She noticed on a morning in October that she and Edric had been in the same room together for most of each day for 9 months, and that the proportion of that time spent in companionable silence versus conversation was something she would have described to a librarian cataloging the data as approximately 40-60, with the proportion shifting across the months from more silence early on to more conversation later, with the silence becoming comfortable enough that it no longer required explaining. She noticed that she had opinions about dinner that she expressed without calculating whether they were welcome. She noticed that when he was away for a night, she noticed the house differently, not worse, not lonelier exactly, but aware of an absence the way you were aware of an absence. She noticed that she had started bringing books from the library to her room at night, specific ones she wanted to continue with, and that she had mentioned this to him once, casually, and he had said something about the 1880s section having 2 volumes she might find interesting, and she had gone to look for them and found that he had set them on the shelf nearest the door where she would find them easily. And she had not mentioned this to him, because she had understood from the gesture that it did not need to be mentioned. These were the kinds of things she was noticing. She was also noticing that she had been building the sentence she wanted to say for approximately 3 months and had not said it yet, not because she was afraid of it, but because she was certain of it, and the certainty required the right moment, and the right moment was something she was content to wait for. It arrived on an October afternoon in the library. It was raining. The hills outside the window were the gray-green of hills in heavy rain, and the rain was the kind that settled in for the whole of an afternoon without any negotiation. The fire in the library was lit, which Clara did on days like this without being asked, because she understood the house's requirements as well as he did after 20 years. The library was warm and grey-lit, and had the specific quality that it had on rainy afternoons, which was the quality of a room that had been designed for exactly this kind of weather. Myra was in her chair, he was in his. They had been reading for an hour. The letters from the study box had been coming out at the rate of perhaps 1 or 2 an evening, and they had reached the 2010s now, the later ones, the ones where Hilda's handwriting had started very slightly to change in ways Myra could now read from having looked at so many of them. He was not reading the letters today. He was reading something else, and she was reading the natural history book from 1884 that she had come back to several times since he had pointed her to it. She set the book down. "I want to say something," she said. He looked up. She had thought about how to say it for 3 months. She had concluded that the most accurate version was also the simplest, because it usually was. "I love you," she said. "I want to be clear that I know what I mean by that, and that I'm not saying it because the situation seems to call for it, or because Hilda arranged for it, or because of any reason, except that it's true and I've been certain of it for long enough to say it." He was very still. She looked at him steadily, which was a thing she had become good at. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I'm not saying it to produce a response. I'm saying it because it's true and because you should know it." He was quiet for a moment. "I know what I mean by it also," he said. "And I have known it for longer than I said it, which is a pattern Hilda would have found characteristically inconvenient of me." Myra looked at the window, she looked back at him. She would have pointed it out in a letter, she said. "Yes," he said, "she would have." A quiet, "I love you," he said, simply, in the order of the words. She nodded. She picked up the book. He picked up his. The fire worked through the rain, and the library held them, and outside the hills were grey-green and steady, and the catalogue was through the 1940s, and the argument was complete again, and she was here, and she was going to keep being here, and the sentence she had been building for 3 months had been said and received in exactly the way she had hoped and expected it would be, which was quietly and directly and without requiring more of the moment than the moment had. That was what she had wanted. That was exactly right. She made a note in the back of the notebook she used for thinking in grids: the library, October, rain, the hills, 2 people in chairs with books and a fire, and a sentence that had been true for a while and was now also known. She looked at the note. She closed the notebook. She went back to the 1884 book and the argument it was making about the natural world, which was still an interesting argument, which was the point, that the argument kept being interesting, that there was always more to follow, that the following was the point as much as the arriving. The afternoon rain continued. The fire continued. The library was warm and the house was quiet, and Myra Voss was somewhere she was going to be. In November, she called her old library school professor. This was something she had been thinking about since the summer, in the form of a question she had been circling. What did she want to do with the life that was now, unambiguously, hers to arrange? She had the estate income, which was modest and sufficient. She had the catalogue project, which had become something she thought about in terms of phases rather than tasks. She had the house and the garden and the letters from the box. She also had a library science degree she had paid for with loans she was still paying, and which she had not used in a way that corresponded to the degree since she had graduated, because the 2 years in the Voss house had not been that kind of use. Professor Elaine Marsh had supervised her final year project, which had been about the organization of private collections, the specific problems of libraries assembled by individuals over long periods, the way private passion and professional method intersected and sometimes conflicted. The professor had said at the time that the project revealed a genuine capacity for a particular kind of archival work, and had asked if Myra had thought about specializing. Myra had said she was not sure yet. That had been 4 years ago. She was sure now. She called from the corner room on a Tuesday morning. The professor remembered her, which was something she had not entirely assumed. They talked for an hour. The professor asked about the years since graduation. Myra described them with the directness she had been practicing, what they had been and what had come after and where she was now. The professor listened without performing anything and asked specific questions. "The private collection you're working on," the professor said. "The scope of it?" "Several centuries," Myra said. "The collection itself spans from the early 19th century to the present, but some of the acquisitions are older than the room they're housed in. The catalog was last updated in 1994, and I've been restoring it to current since January." "What period are you in now?" 1948, Myra said. "Alone with the collection's owner. He has detailed knowledge of the acquisition history and the rationale for the organization, which is non-standard but coherent. He can explain the reasoning for decisions that would otherwise look arbitrary." The professor was quiet for a moment. "This is significant work," she said. "I know," Myra said. "Are you writing it up?" Myra had not thought about this. She sat with it. "I hadn't thought of it that way," she said. "A private collection of this age and coherence with a catalog being restored from primary sources by someone with your background," the professor said, "is exactly the kind of work the field needs documented. Not for publication necessarily, though that's possible, but as a record, a methodology. You're doing something very specific here." Myra looked at the hills outside the window. "Yes," she said, "I suppose I am." "Come and talk to me," the professor said. "Whenever you can, bring what you have so far. I'd like to see it." She did, in December. She drove south for the first time in months, took a train for the second leg, found the university with the specific comfort of someone returning to a place they had made sense of before. The professor's office was full of the books and papers of a long career, organized in a system that was legible once you understood it, which took her about 4 minutes. She spent 2 hours there. She showed the professor the catalog methodology, the approach she had developed for dealing with the unusual organization by publication date, the way she had handled the gaps, the notation system she had built for provenance information. The professor asked good questions, the kind that pushed her to articulate what she was doing in terms that went beyond the specific case to the general principle. She drove back to Vale House, arriving at 9 in the evening, which was later than she had told Clara she would be back, and the kitchen light was on when she came through the door, and Edric was at the kitchen table with a book and 2 cups of tea, one of them cooling at her place. She sat down. She picked up the tea. "The professor thinks the methodology is significant enough to document," she said, "as a case study, possibly more." "She's right," he said, without any particular surprise. "You've thought about this?" "I've thought that what you're doing is not a small thing," he said. "The specific skills you're applying to a specific collection that would otherwise be inaccessible to the field." He looked at the table. "I would like the work to be yours, not only the collections." She thought about what yours meant in this context, the attribution of a methodology, the record of a process, work that accumulated into something with her name attached to it. "I haven't had work with my name attached to it," she said. "No," he said. "I would like that," she said. "Good," he said. She drank her tea. The kitchen was warm and the hills were dark outside, and the house was quiet in the way this house was quiet, and she was back, which was a thought she had with a specific kind of ease, back, which was different from returned, which was different from arrived. Back. She was back. She finished her tea and went to bed and slept well and woke in the morning to the hills going gold in the first light. And she sat in the window seat with her coffee and thought about the methodology document and what it would need to say and where she would begin. She knew where she would begin. She would begin with the collection's owner, with 40 years of acquisition history, with the logic of organization by publication date and what it revealed about the mind behind it. She would begin with what was specific and work outward to what was general, which was always the right direction. She got up. She made tea. She went to the library. She opened the notebook to a new section and wrote at the top, "Methodology, restoration of a long-dated private natural history collection." She wrote for 2 hours. She had a great deal to say. The new year arrived, and with it the final section of the catalogue. She had been working on it for 12 months now, from January to January, which was a complete year, which was the longest she had worked on anything continuously in her life. And the completion of the year had a quality she had not expected, not finality, because the catalogue was not finished. The catalogue was a living document, and she intended to keep it so, but a specific completeness, the recognition of a duration. She and Edric marked it quietly. She made dinner, which she had been doing more often as the months went on, because she was good at it, and because she found cooking grounding in the specific way of tasks that were complete in themselves. She made something with the root vegetables from the garden, preserved from autumn, and the herbs from the kitchen garden which Douglas maintained, with an almost personal commitment to their continued excellence. They ate. She said, "It's been a year." He said, "Yes." "Of the catalogue," she said. "Among other things," he said. She looked at him. "Among other things," she agreed. They were quiet for a moment, the comfortable quiet that meant something rather than nothing. "I want to ask you something," she said, "that I've been thinking about for a few months." "Go ahead." "The almost marriage," she said. "The 16th century, you said you have not come close since then, 400 and some years." "Yes," he said. "Why not?" she said. "Not because I'm assuming you should have. I'm curious about the actual reason." He was quiet, he looked at the table. He was doing the thing he did when he was thinking carefully, the internal look, the full attention turning inward to find the accurate version. "Because I decided," he said, "at some point in the decades after Catherine that the cost of that kind of connection exceeded what I was willing to pay." He paused. "I was not wrong to think so at that particular time. The cost had been very high and I had not been equipped to carry it." Another pause. "What I did wrong was to continue that decision past the point at which it was true, to allow it to become a habit rather than a reasoned position." "Hilda," Myra said. "Yes," he said. Hilda tried to interrupt the habit for the last several years of her life. This, he gestured at the kitchen and at her and at the house in general, was her final attempt. "Her most elaborate attempt," Myra said. "Yes," he said, and there was in his voice when he said it the warmth of someone who had known a person well enough to be exasperated by them, and had found that the exasperation was itself a form of love. She thought about Hilda. She thought about 40 years of letters and the deliberate architecture of what had been arranged. She thought about a woman in her 70s who had known she was running out of time and had spent some of that remaining time on this, on the careful construction of a door. "I want to say something," she said. He looked at her. "I know the arrangement started with the will," she said. "I know Hilda made it happen, and I know that at the beginning it was a condition rather than a choice. I want you to know," she found the right words carefully, "I want you to know that it is a choice now, on my part, completely. That I am here because I am choosing to be here and not because the structure that was arranged made it the easiest option." He looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. "Good," she said. "I wanted to be sure it was said." She picked up her fork. He picked up his. They finished dinner in the quiet that was full rather than empty, and outside the January hills were bare and still under the first proper cold of the new year, and the house was warm, and the catalogue was in the final section now and moving toward completion, and Myra Voss was in the place she had chosen to be. She was going to keep choosing it. Every morning. For as long as she had mornings. She thought that was the right length of time. She thought that was exactly enough. In February, Myra finished the catalogue. Not permanently. Nothing like a catalogue was permanently finished. That was the point of a living document, that it grew with the collection, that it recorded additions and departures, and the ongoing argument of an assembled body of knowledge. But the restoration was done. The 12 months of work that had taken a document last updated in 1994 and made it accurate and current and complete, that work was done. The gaps were filled. The methodology was documented. The cross-referencing was coherent. She made the last entry on a Thursday afternoon in February, in the library, with the pale winter light coming in at the low angle it had in this room in this season, and she set the pen down with the specific satisfaction of a person who has done something they intended to do and have done it correctly. She looked at the catalogue. She looked at the shelves. The argument was whole now. From the earliest acquisitions in the 1820s to the most recent box from the December order, the collection told its story in order, the way an argument told its story when you could follow every step. She had been following it for a year, and she knew it better than almost anything she had ever known professionally. She heard him come in. She did not turn. "The catalogue is done," she said. A pause, then his footsteps to where she was standing, and he stood beside her and looked at the shelves the way she was looking at them. "Yes," he said. The 1940s look right now, she said. You can see the gap being filled. The argument continues through the war years and out the other side. Yes, he said. She turned her head and looked at him. He was looking at the shelves with the expression she had come to understand as the expression of someone who was receiving something they had not expected to receive and were taking their time with it. Hilda would have had a great deal to say about this, she said. She would have said a lot of it in letters, he said. Yes, Myra said, and with underlines. He made the sound that was not quite a laugh but was its first cousin. She had catalogued this sound over the months the way she catalogued everything, by frequency, by context, by what summoned it. She knew what summoned it now. It was a good thing to know. I want to start the methodology document, she said, in earnest. Not the notes I've been making, but the actual document, the one the professor wants. When will you start? Monday, she said. I want to spend the weekend with the catalogue as it is now, before I start describing it to someone else. That seems right, he said. She looked at the shelves for another moment. Can we read a letter tonight, she said, from the box, the ones from the 2010s, the last few years? Yes, he said. They went to the study after dinner. He took the box from the bottom drawer and placed it on the desk and opened it to the last bundle, the one with the highest year on its strip of paper. He untied it. He took out the first letter. He read it aloud. Hilda's voice, in her handwriting, in his reading of it, came into the study with the specific quality of presence that letters produced when they were read carefully by someone who had known the person who wrote them. Myra sat in the chair across the desk and listened. The letter was from 2020. It was about a book Hilda had been reading and a disagreement she had had with a neighbor, and at the end, 2 paragraphs about a girl she had noticed at the estate who had come to stay. She is careful, Hilda had written, very careful in the way people are when they have learned that carefulness is required. I have been watching her. She thinks clearly. She reads when she can, which is rarely because they keep her too occupied to read. She does not seem to know she is interesting. I am not sure if that is something I should tell her or something she needs to find out herself. What do you think? I value your opinion on this. You have always understood the difference. Myra looked at the window. She thought about 2020. She thought about herself at 22 arriving at the Voss estate with 1 suitcase and the careful desperation she had worn for years. She thought about Hilda watching her and seeing something and writing a letter about it to a man 3 hours north and asking for his opinion. What did you write back? She said. He was quiet for a moment. I said, he said, that the recognition itself might be enough for now, that someone who had learned carefulness as a survival skill was unlikely to be reached by being told. That the better intervention was simply to see her clearly for as long as it was possible to do so. She was quiet. I said it somewhat differently, he said, more words. I imagine, she said. She wrote back that she had been thinking the same but had wanted another opinion. He looked at the letter in his hand. She also said that she was going to use the girl's name, every time, without exception. Myra looked at the window. She thought about Tuesday mornings, the kitchen, the specific quality of hearing your own name said by someone who simply knew it. She decided that in 2020, Myra said. Yes, I arrived in 2021. Yes, She looked at the bundle of letters in the box, the remaining letters from the last few years, all of them with the blue wax. All of them written to this man, from a woman who had been watching and deciding and planning and naming. She decided to use my name, she said, before she had spent a week with me. Yes, he said. Before she knew me. She saw enough, he said. In the first days she saw enough. Myra was quiet for a long time. The study was warm, the winter was deep outside, the house held everything quietly. She loved me, Myra said, not a question, a recognition. Yes, he said, completely. She nodded. She did not cry. She had done her crying about Hilda privately, over months, in the corner room and in the garden and once in the library when she had found a bookmark in one of the 1880s books that was clearly Hilda's, a small strip of card with Hilda's handwriting on it, a note to herself about something she had been thinking about. She had cried about Hilda that time and had then set the bookmark carefully in the catalogue as a provenance note. She did not cry now. She received the recognition and held it and felt its weight and let it be what it was. "Read the next one," she said. He took out the next letter. He read. Hilda's voice came into the study and filled it with the quality of presence that letters produced, the specific presence of someone gone who was not absent, and Myra sat in the winter study and listened, and the night was quiet, and the catalogue was complete, and she was here, and she was going to keep being here. She thought that Hilda would have been pleased with this. She thought she was probably right about that. She let herself think it. Spring came back around. She had seen spring here once before the previous year, the tentative first green she had watched from the kitchen window in March on the morning the judgment arrived. She had not yet understood that morning that she would be here to see the spring fully arrive and then retreat and then return. She had said she was not going anywhere, but she had not yet known what that meant in practice, which was that it meant this, another spring, the hills going green again, the garden waking up, Douglas back to twice a week with his strong views about the soil and the weather. She watched the season change from the window seat. She watched it from the library shelves. She watched it from the untended corner of the garden, which had done something interesting over the winter. Some of the things she had thought were dormant had turned out to be very much not dormant, had simply been organizing themselves underground, and what came up in March was larger and more deliberate than what had been there in autumn. She told Douglas about the untended corner. He came to look at it with her. He crouched down and looked at what was coming up. He named things. She wrote the names in the notebook she had started for the garden, because she had started a garden notebook, because she started notebooks for things she was paying attention to. "Deliberate?" she asked, about one of the things he had named. "Not by anyone recently," he said. "Something put it here long time ago, it comes back." She looked at the plant. It came back. Something had put it here a long time ago, and it came back every spring, had been coming back every spring for longer than anyone currently in the garden had been alive. She thought about that. She wrote it in the notebook. The methodology document was now 30 pages long and growing. She had been working on it since February with the focused, graduated attention she brought to things that were genuinely hers. Professor Marsh had seen the first draft in March and had said, with the specific careful enthusiasm she used for things she found genuinely good, that it was exactly what she had hoped. She had asked if Myra had thought about publishing. Myra had said she was thinking about it. She was thinking about it. She was also thinking about the second document she wanted to write, which was not the methodology but the story, the actual account of how she had arrived at this library and this catalogue and this house and this life, which was a different kind of document from the methodology, more personal, more complicated, requiring a different kind of honesty. She had been making notes for it in the back of the notebook she used for thinking in grids. She had 3 pages of notes, and she had not started the document yet, but she thought about it in the way she thought about things she intended to begin. She would begin it when she was ready. She was close to ready. In April, Petra came to visit. She had written asking if she could, which Myra had thought about for a week and had replied to with a yes. She came on a Thursday, driven by Owen, who dropped her at the gate and did not come in, which Myra thought showed a reasonable degree of social intelligence on his part. Petra rang at the gate. Myra let her in. They sat in the drawing room, which Myra had chosen because it was neutral ground, not the library, which was hers, not the kitchen, which was warm and domestic in a way that presumed comfort they had not yet established. The drawing room was formal enough, and also the room in the house she had spent the least time in, which meant it did not carry much of what had accumulated in the other rooms. Petra was different. Not completely different. She was still Petra, the organized presentation, the careful calibration, but there was something underneath it that had shifted in the year since the judgment, something that was less performed. She sat across from Myra and looked at her without the quality she had always had before of managing the encounter. "You look well," Petra said. "I am well," Myra said, simply and accurately. "The house is," Petra looked at the room. "I didn't expect it to be like this." "What did you expect?" "Something more," she thought about it. "I expected something more ornate, more obviously what it is." Myra thought about the coat on the hook by the door and the boots with the mud and the working beds in the garden. "It's more practical than it looks from the outside," she said. "Yes," Petra said, "I can see that." They talked for an hour. It was not easy conversation. It was the conversation of two people who had a complicated history, and were trying to see if there was something on the other side of it that was worth getting to. It was also honest, which was something Myra had not expected and which she found when it happened that she valued. Petra asked about the catalogue. She asked what Myra was doing here in terms of work. She asked about the garden. She asked these questions with genuine curiosity, without the quality Myra had always associated with her questions before, the quality of gathering information that could be useful. Myra answered directly. Near the end, Petra said, "Hilda talked about you, at family dinners. We didn't listen the way we should have." "No," Myra said. I know that." She looked at her hands. She was trying to tell us something and we were not interested in hearing it. Myra was quiet for a moment. She thought about Hilda at the family dinner table trying to tell them. She thought about what it would have cost Hilda to try, knowing it was not landing. She arranged the alternative, Myra said, when talking didn't work. Yes, Petra said, she did. And there was in Petra's voice something Myra had never heard in it before, the specific quality of someone standing at a distance from themselves and not being able to entirely defend what they saw. Petra left at 4. She shook Myra's hand at the door, a real handshake, not the careful minimal contact she had always offered before. She said she hoped she could come again sometime. Myra said she could. She watched the car go down the drive. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Edric was behind her. She had felt him arrive at the top of the corridor without hearing him, which was a thing she had gotten used to. "How was it?" he said. "Strange," she said, "and also good, both of those at once." "Yes," he said, "that's often what repair looks like." She thought about this, about the specific quality of repair, not returning to what was, but building something that accounted for what had happened and went forward from there anyway. She looked different, Myra said, less like she was performing being reasonable and more like she was trying to actually be it. "That's a meaningful distinction," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is." She came back inside. She went to the library. She sat in her chair. She picked up the notebook and opened it to the section she had been keeping for the second document, the personal account, and she looked at the 3 pages of notes she had made. She thought about the drawing room conversation, about Hilda at a dinner table trying to tell a family something they were not interested in hearing, about the alternative she had arranged, about a letter with blue wax and a note under a door and a man who had agreed not to refuse and a bathroom floor and a toothbrush and 2 years of being called the girl. She picked up her pen. She turned to a new page. She began. Myra wrote the document over the course of 2 months, from April to June, in the mornings and sometimes in the evenings, in the corner room at the desk with the view of the hills. She wrote it the way she had written everything that mattered to her, directly in order without embellishment, but with accuracy about the things that were difficult to say. The personal account of an arrival, a 2-year interlude, a will, a condition, a choice, and what had been built from the choice. She did not title it until she had written the last line, because she wanted to know what it was before she decided what to call it. When she finished, she read it back, all of it, in one sitting on a June afternoon with the window open and the sound of the garden coming in. She read it carefully. She changed a few things, words that were not exact enough, a sequence that needed reordering. She left the difficulty in where the difficulty belonged. She titled it "What Stays." She printed it, she put it in a folder. She put the folder on the desk in the corner room and looked at it for a day, which she sometimes did with finished things, letting them be finished before she did anything with them. Then she gave it to Edric. "I want you to read this," she said, "before anyone else." He read it in the study. She went to the library and updated 2 catalog entries and looked at the shelves for a while and came back to the study doorway. He was on the last page. She waited. He looked up. "This is good," he said. "I know," she said. "Is it accurate about the parts that involve you?" "Yes," he said, "more generous than I would have been in places, but accurate." "Generous how?" "The part about the door," he said. "You gave me more credit than the gesture deserved." "You don't know what the gesture was worth to me," she said. "That's not yours to assess." He looked at her. "Fair," he said. She took the folder back. "I'm going to give it to the professor," she said, "as context for the methodology document, and I'm going to think about whether I want it to go anywhere beyond that." "What are you thinking?" he said. "I'm thinking," she said, "that the private version is for the people who were in it. But the shape of it, the shape of someone finding out they are worth something from a bathroom floor, might be useful for other people to read." He looked at her steadily. "Hilda," he said, "would have said the same thing in nearly those words." Myra thought about this. She thought about it with the specific warmth that arriving at a Hilda comparison produced in her. Not pain, not grief, something warmer than both, the specific quality of being understood by someone across time. "I know," she said, "that's probably why I said it." She went back to the library. She picked up the catalog. She made the next entry. Outside the June hills were the deep green they were only in June, before the summer dried them to amber, and the garden was in full voice, and Douglas was doing something methodical with the herb beds, and somewhere in the house Clara was doing something efficient, and the catalog was alive and current and growing, and Myra Voss was in the library she had been given and had made her own, doing work that was hers, in a house that said her name when she came back to it. She looked up from the catalog. She looked at the shelves. The argument ran from the 1820s to now, continuous and complete, the record of a mind paying attention across time. You could follow it. You could see where it was going and where it had been, and the where it was going was still open, still growing, still adding itself one entry at a time. That, she thought, was the point. Not the arrival, not the finished thing, the continuing. She made the next entry. She was going to keep making entries. She was somewhere she had chosen, and the choosing was the work, and the work was good, and the morning was hers, and the afternoon was hers, and the evening would be hers, in the library with the fire and the letters from the box and a man who had agreed not to refuse and who had meant, when he did not refuse, something more complete than any arrangement could contain. She made another entry. The catalog grew. The hills held the June light. The house was warm. She was here. She was going to stay. She was, she thought, with the quiet, complete certainty of someone who had arrived at a true thing after a long journey toward it, exactly where she was always going to end up, if someone had only held a door open long enough. The door was held. She had walked through. She was staying. That was everything. That was more than enough. That was the whole of it, and it was the right size, and she was in it, and it was hers. The thing about staying somewhere was that staying accumulated. Myra did not fully understand this until the second autumn. The first autumn she had been watching, cataloging, learning the shape of the place. The second autumn she knew the shape already, and what arrived in its place was something more particular. The knowledge of this specific autumn, with the light it had, and the color it brought to the hills and the way the air changed in early October, and the knowledge of how this autumn compared to the last one, and what that comparison said about both. She had been here 16 months. In 16 months she had learned the house in the way you learned a thing by being inside it, not the way you learned it from a description, or from a plan, or from being given the important facts in order. The way you learned it from the morning light and the evening sound and the specific quality of the cold when October committed to itself, and the way the library felt different in autumn than in spring, and the way the catalog looked different in October light than in June light, which it did, because she had been in the library in both kinds of light and had noticed the difference. She was learning the man who lived here the same way. Not from the prepared account. From the morning habits and the evening preferences and the specific things he found funny and the specific things he found worth returning to, and the way he held a book differently depending on whether he was reading carefully or simply being near a book for comfort, which was a thing people did sometimes, being near books for comfort, and she had noticed this about him in the early months and had not said anything about it and had simply registered it as true. She knew he disliked the month of January. This was not something he had told her directly. It was something she had observed, the particular quality of his attention in January, slightly more turned inward, the way he spent more time in the study and less in the library, the way he answered questions with the same accuracy but with a quality of effortfulness that the other months did not require. She had noted this and thought about it and eventually asked. He said it was when Catherine had died. The fever in January in the 16th century. The same January returning every year for 400 years, with its particular quality of cold and light and her absence. Does it get better? She asked. It becomes more familiar, he said. That is not the same thing. No, she said. It isn't. She had thought about what she could offer for January and had concluded that the most honest answer was presence. The same presence she offered in all the other months, without adjustment, without the self-consciousness of performing support. She was there. She would continue to be there. January was a month that happened every year and they were inside it together, and that was what she had. He had said in February that it had been a different January than usual. She had said she was glad. He had said he was glad also. That had been the January of the 16th month, and now it was the October of the 16th month, and the hills were doing what they did in the second week of October, which she knew now because she had watched the second week of October arrive twice, and it was doing the same thing in approximately the same way, which told her something about the hills and about paying attention to things across time. She had a notebook specifically for the garden now, and a notebook for the methodology document, and a notebook for the personal account, and the original notebook with the graph paper for thinking in grids, which she still used for its original purpose, and a newer notebook she had started for things she wanted to remember from the letters, the specific observations Hilda had made that she wanted to carry. The letters from the box were almost done. There were 7 remaining from the last 2 years of Hilda's life, from the period after she had written to Edric to tell him what she intended to do. She had been reading them slowly, 1 or 2 a month, because she wanted them to last. She knew they were almost done. She was being deliberate about the pace. She thought about the last letter, the blue wax, the drawer in the nightstand where she kept it still with the stone and the bookmark and the cards. She took it out sometimes, not to read, she had the words by memory now, but to hold, the specific weight of 3 pages that had said stay. She had stayed. She was staying. She would keep staying. She thought about what staying looked like from the outside, and from the inside, and whether the 2 views matched. From the inside it looked like this: mornings in the window seat, evenings in the library, dinners at the kitchen table, conversations that started in one room and sometimes continued in another without either of them deciding to move, which was the kind of thing that happened when 2 people had spent enough time together that transitions happened without management. It looked like the catalog growing. It looked like the methodology document growing. It looked like Douglas saying in September that the untended corner had done something interesting with the August rain, and did she want to come see, and her going to see. It looked like calling the professor on Tuesdays sometimes and talking for an hour. It looked like the letter from Petra at the beginning of the year, and the letter she had written back. From the outside she could not say what it looked like. She was not in the habit of imagining the outside view of things. She had spent too long in other people's outside views of her to find that a comfortable position. She looked from the inside. From the inside, it looked like her life. Her actual life, the one she had not known how to reach. She had reached it. She was in it. In November, she finished the methodology document. Professor Marsh read the full version and said, in an email that Myra read at the desk in the corner room on a Monday morning, that it was one of the most significant practical contributions to private collection management she had encountered in 20 years of supervising such work, and that she intended to pursue publication through the right channels, and that Myra should expect to hear from 2 colleagues of hers who worked in the relevant field. Myra read the email twice. She sat with it for a moment. Then she went downstairs and found Edric in the library and said, "The methodology document is going to be published." He set down his book, he looked at her. "The professor says it's significant," she said. "She says she's going to pursue publication, and that I should expect to hear from people in the field." He was quiet for a moment. "Your name on it," he said. "My name on it," she said. He nodded once in the specific way that meant he had received something, and it had landed correctly. "Good," he said. She sat down in her chair. She picked up her catalog. She made the next entry. The library was quiet around them with the right kind of quiet, and the November light came in at its angle, and the fire was lit, and the catalog was growing, and her name was going to be on a document that said something worth saying, and she was in the place where she was going to be. In December, the professor's colleagues wrote. She replied to both. She had 2 conversations on the phone that were the kind of conversations she had not had since library school, conversations about ideas, about methodology, about the specific problems and possibilities of the field, and she found that she had a great deal to say, which was something she had known about herself in the abstract but which she had not had the occasion to discover was still true. She told Edric about both conversations at dinner. He listened with the full attention he brought to things that mattered. "You sound like yourself," he said. She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "When you talk about the work," he said, "you sound like the person you are when you are not managing anything, the version of yourself that exists when there is nothing to manage." He paused. "I have been watching you become more that version across the year. It is different from the outside than the version that arrived." She thought about the version that had arrived, the careful economy, the minimum footprint, the suitcase that was not unpacked. "She was managing everything," Myra said. "Yes," he said. "I don't miss her," she said. "The managing version. I thought I might miss her because she was familiar, but I don't." "No," he said, "I did not think you would." She looked at her dinner. She thought about the managing version and the current version and the distance between them, which was a year of mornings and evenings and dinners and conversations and catalog entries and a window seat and a drawer with a letter in it and a man who opened doors. "Hilda knew who I was under the managing," she said. "That's why she could describe it in the letter, the person under it." "Yes," he said. "And she thought that person was worth this, worth the structure she arranged." "She was right," he said. She looked at him. "Without question," he said. She picked up her fork. They finished dinner. The December evening settled over the hills and the kitchen was warm and the house was the house she lived in. And she was who she was when she was not managing anything, and that person was, she had discovered across 16 months of evidence, someone she was glad to be. She was going to keep being her. She was going to keep staying. She was going to keep making catalog entries and growing the methodology document and writing in the notebooks, and going to see what Douglas was doing in the garden, and reading the letters from the box, and asking questions and receiving answers and giving them, and being in the library in the mornings and the evenings and all the hours in between. She was going to keep choosing. The catalog would keep growing. The methodology document would be published. The personal account was in a folder on the desk in the corner room with the title "What Stays on its cover," and she had not yet decided what to do with it beyond the professor's reading, and she did not need to decide yet, because she had learned, in 16 months of practicing it, that decisions made with time were better decisions than decisions made from urgency, and she was not in a hurry. She was not in a hurry. This was new. This was one of the things staying had done to her. It had given her the specific unhurried quality of someone who did not need to calculate the exit, who was not holding one foot angled toward the door, who could let things take the time they took. She had learned this here. She was going to keep learning it. The hills outside the December window were bare and still and held themselves with the patience of things that had been doing this for a very long time and had no intention of doing anything else. And the house was warm, and the library waited, and the catalog was there, and the man who had agreed not to refuse and had then decided to agree completely was somewhere in the house doing what he did. And Myra Voss was at the kitchen table with her tea going pleasantly warm in her hands and her life completely and exactly hers, and she was staying in it. And she was going to keep staying in it, and the keeping was the point, and the point was good. She finished her tea. She made another cup. She took it to the library. She opened the catalog. She picked up her pen. She began. She read the last letter on a Sunday in January. She had been saving it since November, the way she sometimes saved the last of something she was not ready to be done with, not from indecision, but from the knowledge that the ending of a thing was worth arriving at properly, in the right conditions, with enough space to receive it. Sunday in January felt right, the month he found difficult, the season of cold light and bare hills, the time of year that asked you to be exactly where you were with no distractions. She went to the study, she took the box from the drawer, she opened it to the last bundle, she untied the bundle, there was one letter left. She sat in the chair across from the desk. She broke the blue wax seal. She unfolded the paper. The handwriting was the smallest she had seen from Hilda, the hand very nearly at its limit, the pen marks lighter than before, but the intention for every word still there, still Hilda, still the handwriting of someone saying exactly what they meant. She read it. It was short, 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph said that she was writing this knowing it would be the last, and that she was not frightened, and that she wanted that on record because she knew he would worry about whether she had been frightened. She had not been. She had been organized about it, she wrote, in the way she was organized about everything, and she trusted he would recognize that as the compliment she intended. The second paragraph was about both of them. It said, "I have watched you for 40 years and I have watched her for 2, and I believe, with the confidence of someone who has paid very close attention to both of you, that you're going to be all right, more than all right. I believe you're going to be very good together in the way that people are very good together when they have both been reduced by their circumstances and have chosen in finding each other to stop being reduced. You are not a project, either of you. You are people. I trust you to remember that about each other on the days it is difficult to remember." The third paragraph was short. "I love you both," she had written. "I am glad I had the time to arrange this. I am glad you both agreed in your different ways to let it be arranged. If there is anything from the other side of this, I intend to find out whether 40-year friendships extend past it. If they do, I will write you a letter." With blue wax she had added in brackets at the end, "As always." Myra sat with the letter. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about the blue wax, the pale, specific blue. She thought about 40 years of the same seal, the same paper, the same handwriting making its arguments and its observations and its decisions. She thought about the last line of the last letter from the woman who had looked at her across a kitchen table on a Tuesday morning and had simply used her name, who had looked at her and decided, before she had spent more than a few days with her, that she was worth seeing. She folded the letter. She looked at it in her hands. She thought about what Hilda had said, the confidence of someone who had paid very close attention, all right, more than all right. She thought about the catalogue, through the 1960s now and growing. She thought about the methodology document, which had a submission date and her name on the cover. She thought about the second document, What Stays, which she had shown to Professor Marsh the week before and which the professor had read without comment, and had then said quietly that she thought it needed to exist in the world and that she would help Myra find the right way to put it there. She thought about Petra's letter in the drawer, about the ongoing correspondence they had started, tentative and honest, and nothing like what the relationship had been before, which was perhaps exactly the point. That repair was not restoration but something different, a new structure built from the materials of an old one that had not held. She thought about Douglas in the garden and what was going to come up in the untended corner this spring. She thought about the spring hills and the summer light and the autumn amber and the winter bare, all four having arrived and returned now, the second year completing itself, the duration becoming legible. She thought about a Tuesday morning in a kitchen, and a note slipped under a door, and a front row chair in a drawing room where 40 people discovered their expectations were wrong, and a small sitting room that had been waiting for a purpose, and a window seat she had sat in for 12 minutes the first time and had sat in every morning since. She put the letter in the drawer with the others. She closed the drawer. She sat for another moment in the quiet of the study, which was the quiet of a room that had held 40 years of letters, and was now holding the last one and understood the weight of it. Then she stood. She went to the library. He was in his chair by the window, which was where he was in the mornings. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her face and read it the way he read it now, with the accuracy of someone who had been reading it for a year and 4 months and intended to keep reading it. "The last one," he said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet, she was quiet. The library held them in the right kind of quiet, the kind that was inhabited rather than empty. "She said she was going to write you a letter," Myra said, "from wherever she went, if 40-year friendships extended there." He looked at the window. "She also said she was going to find out," Myra said. Something moved in his expression, the small, specific movement of a person receiving something they had needed to receive and had not known they were waiting for. "That," he said, "is exactly what she would do." "Yes," Myra said. "It is." She sat down in her chair. She picked up the catalogue. She found her place. She made the next entry. Outside, the January hills were still and bare, and held themselves with the patience they always held themselves with, season after season, year after year, the patience of things that knew how to wait and how to continue and how to return. The light came in at its January angle, low and considered, and lay across the shelves and the catalogue and the floor between them. She made another entry. He picked up his book. The library was warm. The house was quiet. The catalogue was growing. She was here. She was going to keep being here. That was everything. That was exactly right.